Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Y'all Men of Revolution, and we got a World War III alert. An enemy of my enemy is a friend. The NATO and ISIS alliance versus the resistance. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, the mask has fallen off. The emperor has no clothes. The whole world knows NATO and ISIS are good buddies.
So right on the cusp of a Lebanon-Israel ceasefire, a Turkish-backed rebel group, along with other terrorist organizations, launched an offensive in Aleppo against Russian and Syrian forces. And I'm sure the U.S. and Israel have nothing to do with this. So to really understand what's happening right now, we first have to understand the parties that are involved in their self-interest. So from what we know, we obviously know Syria and Russia are involved, but also Turkey is involved, Ukraine is involved, the United States are involved, Al-Qaeda is involved, HTS is involved, and less obviously so, Israel and Lebanon. So let's talk about Turkey and Erdogan. So it's important to know that Turkey and Erdogan have always fallen in line with their NATO allies and have always been anti-Assad. It's also important to know that Turkey's had a shaky relationship with Russia at best and has been critical of their invasion of Ukraine, despite knowing NATO is the one who provoked this invasion. In other words, although Erdogan has been careful about his words, I will consider Turkey a supporter of Ukraine. So then it should come as no surprise that right now the terrorist organization HTS, backed by Turkey, is working alongside Ukraine in order to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Aleppo. And for those of you who may be thinking that this terrorist organization is actually just some freedom fighting group out there trying to fight for their Syrian brothers and sisters, first of all, HTS is literally an Al-Qaeda spinoff. Look, the same Al-Qaeda that everybody and their mama knows is backed by the United States. Second of all, these Syrian freedom fighters don't even principally speak Arabic. They speak Uzbek. But the main language of Syria is Arabic. I mean, come on, that's a little bit more than suspicious, right? Even during a temporary ceasefire between Syria's government and HTS was working with Turkish troops. So just to be clear, this HTS group is more affiliated with Turkey than Thanksgiving Day, than it has ever actually been affiliated with the Syrian people. So the question for some will be, well, why now? Now enters Hezbollah, Lebanon, and of course, Israel. You see, Erdogan think he's slick because 2 weeks ago, he said that he's cutting off all relations with Israel because of the genocide they're committing in Palestine. But it really looks like he was just saving face because he knew this operation right now was coming. Because here, as Vanessa Billy so eloquently points out, although there's been a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, they know that Hezbollah will work with Syria to replenish their arms in case Israel attacks again. This attack on Aleppo will impede any effort to restock Hezbollah's munitions, which is why anti-Assad experts are saying that this offensive strategically benefits both Turkey and Israel. The same Turkey that allegedly is cutting off relations with Israel because of the genocide that they're committing in Gaza. Y'all don't think Erdogan know what he's doing? Now, of course, the last question might be, why the hell is Ukraine and Syria? What they got to do?
Revolutionary salute to my brother Roscoe for the donation to the war chest. He says, salute, King. Thank you for that live earlier you had today. That was good casserole we needed. Yes, sir. It tastes bad, but that good old time religion was good for you, brother. You know, I appreciate the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love. Family salute.
With Bashar al-Assad? And why are Ukrainian troops working alongside terrorist organizations? Well, yes, first of all, it seems pretty odd brand for neo-Nazis to work with terrorist organizations to overthrow democracy. I think that's pretty normal, honestly, for Ukrainians. However, Ukraine's sustained involvement in Syria is evidence of a couple of things. That this operation is a fully NATO-sanctioned operation, including arming and assisting the literal terrorists, and that this operation has as much to do with Russia as it has to do with all the other parties mentioned. So I don't know if y'all know, But things aren't going that well for Ukraine right now in this Russia-Ukraine conflict. So what better way to give Ukraine leverage in this situation with Russia than to overextend Russia's military, at least as much as they can before Trump gets in and everything becomes unpredictable and chaotic. And it isn't just Ukraine that's banking on Russia becoming overextended. Because of Russia, in just a few weeks, Palestine will become an official part of BRICS. Russia and Turkey and Erdogan have never seen eye to eye, be it because the leaders just don't like each other or because of Turkey's involvement in NATO. And Putin just plain don't like Netanyahu and the United States. I mean, need I say more? I mean, this is the same United States that gave U.S. weapons to Ukraine to launch an invasion of Russia. So once again, we end up back in my same theory that I've been preaching for about a year and some change now. There might be a lot of subplots rolling right now in Syria and other places in the Middle East. This is probably about Russia, because if Russia doesn't have their hands tied, it will go after Israel. It will protect its allies. And that's obviously including Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. And all the parties involved in the offensive against Aleppo have beef with all of those countries. So in all likelihood, this isn't really just about overthrowing Assad, but more so a last-ditch effort before the empire sinks into chaos under Trump again, to try and stave off Russia in this multipolar world that they are taking part in creating both economically and militarily. But just like the rest of NATO's plans as of late, I'm sure this plan is going to fail miserably too.
A few minutes ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation commented on the current situation in Syria. So, according to the Russian military department, over the past 24 hours, the Syrian army, with the active support of the Russian aerospace forces, destroyed 8 weapons depots and 7 command posts of the terrorists in the provinces of Idlib and Aleppo. Moreover, the representative of the Russian military department, General Igor Konashenkov, also stated that in the last 3 hours alone, as a result of airstrikes by Russian combat aviation, terrorist groups lost 500 of their experienced fighters. It is reported that as of December 3, 2024, the Syrian army, with the help of Russian aerospace forces, managed to stop the advance of terrorists in the southern direction and completely stabilize the situation in the Hama area. In this regard, the commanders of terrorist groups decided to abandon the attack on the city of Hama. After seeing powerful fortified areas of the Syrian army in the Hama area, the terrorists decided to turn west and move towards the seacoast, where key Russian military bases are located. However, in a westerly direction, the terrorists also faced constant airstrikes from Russian combat aviation, as a result of which pro-Turkish and pro-American militants continued to suffer heavy losses in manpower and equipment. Against this backdrop, many military experts expressed confidence that the terrorists would not be able to advance into the Syrian interior, and even gain a foothold in the occupied areas. In addition, on the morning of December 2, it became known that units of the legendary Iraqi armed formation, Hashd al-Shabi, were deploying to help the Syrian army. Later, independent monitoring services also confirmed this information. According to them, on the morning of December 2nd, a military column consisting of 1,000 Iraqi fighters moved from Iraq towards Syria to strengthen the Syrian army and help Bashar al-Assad in his fight against terrorists. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that the armed formation Hashd al-Shabi gained fame throughout the world for its fight against ISIS terrorists. Since 2014, the militants of this legendary armed formation have not only helped the Syrian army in the fight against various terrorist groups in Syria, but also played a crucial role in the destruction of ISIS in Iraq. The units of this armed formation mainly consist of Christian, Shia, and Yazidi fighters. The news that units of such a powerful and experienced armed formation are moving to help the Syrian army has caused alarm and even panic among the field commanders of pro-Turkish and pro-American terrorist groups in Syria. In particular, the Syrian radio intelligence intercepted terrorist communications, where one of the field commanders bluntly stated that Iraqi militants, coming to the aid of the Syrian army, could become a serious problem in achieving their goals in Syria. Surprisingly, a couple of hours after that, American A-10 Thunderbolt II subsonic attack planes attacked a military convoy of Iraqi militants near the settlement of Abu Kamal,
America helping the
preventing them from
terrorists.
crossing the Syrian border. Unfortunately, as a result of this attack by the U.S. Air Force, the military column of units of the armed formation Hashd al-Shabi was almost completely destroyed.
All right.
It is reported that
See,
the Iraqi
America
unit
helping the terrorists. I don't want to see. I don't want nothing to happen to our soldiers. They need to come on home. But you helping the terrorists now. The Iranians, the Russians, the Syrians, the Iraqis, they're not planning to deal with these people, and America is going to get put in a very bad position. But that's what they want, so they get World War III.
units suffered serious losses, losing dozens of heavy equipment and several hundred fighters. Thus, the United States has once again shown the world that Washington is not interested in establishing peace in Syria, and that in order to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad, the Pentagon is even ready to provide military assistance to all kinds of terrorist groups. Apparently, the Americans decided to go all the way, especially considering that Damascus's main allies, Iran and Russia, are busy solving their own problems. This fact inspired Washington. And the owners of the White House decided that they would finally be able to turn Syria into a second Iraq or Libya. Moreover, a few hours ago, Syrian intelligence agencies stated that the terrorists of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group were able to capture the city of Aleppo and Sarakib with the help of Ukrainian military advisors and American advanced military technologies. In particular, it is reported that terrorists in Syria are actively using American drones and electronic warfare systems. According to Syrian intelligence agencies, terrorists cannot use advanced American weapons systems because they do not have the experience and relevant knowledge. It is reported that it was Ukrainian officers who controlled American kamikaze drones and electronic warfare systems during the terrorist assault on Syrian cities such as Aleppo and Sarakib. At the same time, it is worth noting that Israel is also actively helping the United States to achieve all of Washington's goals in Syria. In particular, it became known that on December 2nd, Israeli fighter jets forced an Iranian cargo plane to change course, preventing it from delivering valuable military cargo to Syria. It is reported that weapons intended for the Syrian army and the Lebanese Hezbollah were on board this aircraft. It is noteworthy that this information was confirmed not only by Israeli news sources, but also by numerous Middle Eastern Telegram channels. According to them, this is the second time that Iranian cargo planes, due to threats from Israeli fighter jets, were forced to change course and leave Syrian airspace. Moreover, it is reported that similar cases have also occurred in the skies over Iraq. In particular, the Israeli newspaper Times of Israel confirmed that in the last 30 days alone, Israeli fighter jets prevented 5 Iranian cargo planes from landing in Iraq. At the same time, it is worth noting that the military departments of Israel and Iran prefer not to comment on these cases. By the way, immediately after the US Air Force destroyed a column of Iraqi militants who were trying to help the Syrian army, and Israel did not allow an Iranian cargo plane to deliver weapons to Damascus, Yemen's Houthis attacked an American destroyer and US Navy supply ships in the Arabian Sea, using 16 ballistic and cruise missiles. In addition, Yemen's Houthis, with the help of the hypersonic missile Palestine II, also attacked a military facility in the Israeli city of Jaffa, just south of Tel Aviv. According to the official representative of Yemen's Houthis Yahya Syria, all the intended targets were successfully hit. Against this backdrop, the question remains: where did Yemen's Houthis get such modern missiles? Many Western experts are confident that Yemen's Houthis receive missiles and other types of weapons not only from Iran, but also from Russia.
Putin.
The U.S. forces instructed SDF militias to open a new front in Deir ez-Zor in eastern Syria to advance and attack the positions of Syrian Arab Army. Al Mayadeen correspondent reported today, December 3, 2024. The militias, fully supported by the U.S. occupation, launched attacks on at least 7 villages controlled by Syrian army along with Iranian forces and Arab tribal forces, east of the Euphrates River. According to reports, the clashes were mainly focused on the northern countryside of Deir ez-Zor, with the targeted areas including Al-Hassaniya, Al-Salahiyya, Hadla, Merit, Mazloum, Kashim, and Al-Tabiya. The rebel militias used minesweepers to remove earthen obstacles, and with 12 mortar shells fired at the town of Kashim. Heavy clashes erupted between Syrian army and the militia forces on the outskirts of the towns of Al-Salahiyya, Merit and Al-Tabiya under the direct cover of U.S. artillery and fighter jets from the U.S. occupation bases, near the Conoco oil field and the Al-Omar oil field. A video was published online today, showing U.S. occupation fighter jets carrying out airstrikes, bombarding the positions of Syrian Arab Army and auxiliary forces, to assist SDF separatist forces in their offensive, to advance towards the town of Al-Hassaniya. But, as part of the response of Syrian Arab Army units with the support of auxiliary forces, the fighters managed to thwart the attacks launched by the militias on 7 villages, repelling them, Sana news agency reported. There was no change in the control map in Deir ez-Zor countryside, after the violent attacks launched by militia forces to seize the oil fields in the region together with the U.S. Now, more and more people in the world understand the true origins of the conflict in Syria. The mass violations and plundering of Syrian natural resources are taking place, initiated by the Western elites.
Using terrorists.
in government that would tell the truth about the Syrian war. The Syrian war is we started it. Who's we? I mean, NATO and the economic hitmen in the West and Saudi Arabia and Israel. So again, it's the same. So it's happening again. So as soon as they did a ceasefire with Lebanon, as soon as that happened, all of a sudden Al Qaeda and ISIS are attacking in Syria again. Huh? Isn't that a coinky dink? What you want to know about the sudden rebel gains in Syria's 13-year war and why it matters?
What is this an ad for a protein drink or something? Sudden rebel gains.
So this is exactly the same thing we did in Iraq, the exact same thing we did in Libya, the exact same thing we did in Yemen, Somalia. This is the exact same thing. 20 years of Afghan. This is it. This is Western imperialism aligned with the Saudis and Israel, and this is all about Turkey. This is all about natural resources. That's what this is all about.
Oh, and that's where, guess what? Our great deal with the Taliban, we left all our stuff there and gave them money on top of it.
That's right.
They also trained terrorists for us there.
That's right.
Such as the ones going to Syria.
So when we invaded Libya, we took the Libyan military, we took their stuff and we gave it to ISIS and Al Qaeda to go fight in Syria. That's what we did. That's what the United States did.
Be somebody, we said.
So if you want to know so Jeffrey Sachs said this on MSNBC somewhere around 2018, 19. I'm not sure what the exact date is. But this is the only time you'll hear the truth ever spoken about Syria on national TV. And I don't think he's been invited back since. But here we go. I think this was it. This was him sealing his fate with MSNBC. They don't like to hear this stuff. So listen to what he said.
And we know they sent in the CIA to overthrow Assad. The CIA and Saudi Arabia together in covert operations tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. Eventually it brought in both ISIS as a splinter group to the jihadists that went in. It also brought in Russia. So we have been digging deeper and deeper and deeper. What we should do now is get out and not continue to throw missiles, not have a confrontation with Russia. 7 years has been a disaster under Obama, continuing under Trump. This is what I would call the permanent state. This is the CIA, this is Pentagon, wanting to keep Iran and Russia out of Syria, but no way to do that. And so we have made a proxy war in Syria. It's killed 500,000 people, displaced 10 million. And I'll say predictably so, because I predicted it 7 years ago that there was no way to do this and that it would make a complete chaos. So what I would plead to President Trump is get out. Like his instinct told him, by the way. That was his instinct. But then all the establishment, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Pentagon, everybody said, no, that's irresponsible. But his instinct is right. Get out. We've done enough damage, 7 years. And now we really risk a confrontation with Russia that is extraordinarily dangerous, reckless.
Professor Sachs is correct.
So now this is an admiral, right, from the military-industrial complex. He's on the payroll, and he's going to try to sound. They're really experts. When a good liar is an expert at sounding reasonable. And watch, he's now going to talk about Syria, and he's going to try to make it sound like he's reasonable. Watch this.
This is a massive humanitarian disaster. I think the numbers are actually 600,000 dead and 14 million displaced. So I'm in complete agreement with him on the scale of this, but I would like to see the United States try and be part of the solution.
What United States? So that means keep the United States trying to overthrow another government in the Middle East. And the United States has to be part of the solution. We're the ones who caused the problem. So Jeffrey Sachs doesn't let this go by.
We're the virus and the cure.
I don't think it's attractive, but I think we have to understand how this happened. This happened because of us. These 600,000 are not just incidental. We started a war to overthrow a regime. It was covert. It was Timber Sycamore. People can look it up. The CIA operation, together with Saudi Arabia. Still it's shrouded in secrecy, which is part of the problem in our country. A major war effort, shrouded in secrecy, never debated by Congress, never explained to the American people, signed by President Obama, never explained. And this created chaos. And so just throwing more missiles in right now is not a response.
My only concern.
We need to go, it's, by the way, not to walk away, to go to the UN Security Council, as the Admiral says, to agree with Russia on a strategy for ending the fight. But ending the fight means that we stop trying to overthrow a government, that we stop trying to support rebels who are committed to overthrowing the government. That is where this war continues, because we, to this day, back rebels that are trying to overthrow a government contrary to international law, contrary to the UN Charter, contrary to common sense, contrary to practical path. We can't do it. And it's just creating ongoing crisis to the extent of facing an imminent confrontation with Russia.
Now you'll watch, places like the Young Turks, and they're all on board for this war for Syria. And anybody who told the truth about it, they smeared and slandered and said they were being paid by Assad or they were being paid by Putin. That's what the Young Turks. That's what Cenk Uygur does.
Anna said that's what Aram Mate was. That's what kicked off that whole thing.
That's what kicked off the whole thing. Yeah. With which then I would debunk what they were saying, because they were calling Aaron Mate paid by Russia, paid by Assad. And then I debunked that. And so Anna Kasparian, to get me to shut up, threatened to blackmail me with a fake hashtag #MeToo after she flashed her genitalia to the whole newsroom. And I made a joke about it. She then tried to do a fake sexual harassment thing. Nobody believed it. Even though it still ends up in
the plot of Wicked.
Yeah. Even though it ends up in my Wikipedia page, because the Wikipedia page is edited by the intelligence community, the same intelligence community that wants to do the Syrian war.
Wait, they put that on your Wikipedia that there was anything to that?
Yeah, yes.
Wow. Because why is she careful to talk about?
Have you looked at my Wikipedia? They still say I'm wrong about the Syrian war and the gas attacks, which of course I'm not.
Right.
The Syrian gas attacks are just as dumb as Russiagate, and they're just as easy to debunk. And we debunked them.
Well, remember the blonde lady in charge of that who said the truth gets in the way of getting things done?
That's right.
At her.
So that's what's going on. And how did this all start? Well, General Wesley Clark's going to tell you how this all, they'd had this plan to invade Syria, to invade Libya, to invade Somalia, to invade the Sudan, to invade Iraq and Iran. They've had this plan going back to at least 9/11, but before that.
Yeah.
And now they're doing it. And so here's a General Wesley Clark is going to tell you this right now.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
They have attacked all those nations. In Iran is the last piece.
So they've had this plan for a long time, and they make it up. Oh, we have to save the people from Muammar Gaddafi. We have to save the people from Assad. We have to save the people from the Taliban. We have to save the people. It's always something. It's always.
Wait, is this the new world order they were yammering about before this plan was discovered? Russia had fallen, and now we're gonna have a new world order.
That's
We
right.
gotta knock over all these countries, the third world.
And so as soon as there was a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, they immediately, because Israel sponsors ISIS, the United States sponsors Al Qaeda, they immediately made another push in this 13-year civil war. It's not a civil war. It's not a civil war. It's a war of outside actors funded by the United States CIA to the tunes of billions of dollars. And it's called Timber Sycamore. You can look it up, just like he said. And we're paying the salaries of Al Qaeda in Syria to try to overthrow Assad. Why? For the natural resources. Also, Saudi Arabia wants to put a pipeline through, and Russia, which is aligned with Syria, doesn't want that pipeline to go through. So it's Syria, Russia, and Iran are aligned. And Saudi Arabia and the United States, Turkey, and Israel are aligned, trying to overthrow Assad. Just like we overthrew Gaddafi, just like we overthrew Saddam Hussein, just like we overthrew the Taliban. Now they're trying to do it here. We're the ones. Just like we tried to overthrow, now I'm blanking on the guy's name of Venezuela, Maduro and Chavez. Same thing. This is because there's oil there. More oil in Venezuela than there is in Saudi Arabia. And so this is the same old game. But the news will never tell you that. That's the only time Jeffrey Sachs on MSNBC, they ever told the truth about Syria. So they have a new offensive, and they captured Aleppo, one of Syria's largest cities. It was and by the way, so they were going to attack 7 countries in 5 years. And apparently what's happened since, the first country they were going to start with was America, if you know what I'm talking.
Yeah, I was going to say, did they George Soros Syria?
So it was the first opposition attack on Aleppo since 2016 when a brutal Russian air campaign retook the northwestern city. So they're trying to weaken Russia. So that's what this is. So they're fighting Russia in Ukraine, and they're fighting, I want to fight Russia in Syria. These are all proxy wars. Intervention by Russia, Iran, and Iranian allied Hezbollah and other groups has allowed Assad to remain in power within the 70% of Syria under his control. Remember that the United States still has an occupying force in 30% of Syria. And what 30%? The part that grows the wheat and the part that has the oil.
Pirates, thieves.
Insurgents led by the jihadi group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham launched the 2-pronged attack on Aleppo last week and moved into the countryside around Idlib and neighboring Hama province. The Syrian military and its foreign allies have rushed reinforcements and launched airstrikes as they attempted to stall their momentum. Robert Ford, the last serving U.S. ambassador to Syria, pointed to months of Israeli strikes on Syrian and Hezbollah targets in the area and to Israel's ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon last week as factors providing Syria's rebels with the opportunity. They're not Syria's rebels. They're rebels that are funded by Turkey, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. They're not Syrian. Russia, Assad's main international backer, is also preoccupied with this war in Ukraine. The long war between Assad and his foreign backers and the array of opposition forces seeking this is such a garbage article, this AP article. Assad is the guy with foreign backers, not
the rightful president of Syria. That they, by the way, if you talk to Syrians, they like him.
Yes, they like him.
It's amazing. It's almost like the gap in like people that like Trump versus I can't believe Trump and his Russian backers. To them, they live there, so they like the guy. Like, I don't know why this is hard for people to understand that you wouldn't have a kindly idea about America if they were paying terrorists to blow you up.
And so around 7 million Syrians have fled the country since this started, and a refugee flow that helped change the political map in Europe by refueling anti-immigrant far-right movements. So, so when we did Libya, we had bunch of refugees fled into Europe. When we did Syria, a bunch of refugees fled. When we did Iraq, that's what this is about. And just the other day, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, said this was on purpose, that they had open borders. And now there are more people who are foreign-born immigrants in England than live there, than are natives.
It's a win-win.
Roughly 30% of the country not under Assad is controlled by a range of opposition forces and foreign troops. You like the United States military, asshole. This is an AP fucking article. The U.S. has about 900 troops in northeast Syria, far from Aleppo, to guard against a resurgence to get the oil.
We want we might have a resurgence anytime.
That's right.
Whenever we need one, there's going to be a resurgence.
Both the U.S. and Israel conduct occasional strikes in Syria, for kicks. There's no declaration of war on Syria, but the United States goes around bombing under the guise of the AUMF. What's the AUMF? It's called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force, which the Congress gave to George Bush to go fight the people who flew planes into the trade towers in 9/11. So now they use that to do Afghanistan, Iraq. They use that to do Libya, to do Syria. That's what they're using then. So Congress doesn't have to declare a war. Turkey has forces in Syria as well. Why? Why does Turkey have forces in Syria? And has influence with the broad alliance of opposition forces. So has influence. Yeah, because they're funding the terrorists who are terrorizing Syria.
They fund ISIS. That's why.
That's right.
Influence with. What is that influence? That's so vague.
Coming after years with few sizable changes in territory between Syria's warring parties, the fighting has the potential to be really quite consequential and potentially game-changing if Syrian government forces prove unable to hold their ground, said Charles Lister, a longtime Syrian analyst with the U.S.-based Middle East Institute. He said that before pausing a moment to wipe a small stream of drool from the side of his mouth.
The Middle East Institute.
The Middle East Institute. The U.S. and the UN have long designated the opposition force leading the attack in Aleppo, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known for its initial HTS, as a terrorist organization. They're terrorists. Abu Mohammed al-Golani emerged as a leader of al-Qaeda's Syria branch in 2011. It was an unwelcome intervention to many of Syria's opposition, who hope to keep the fight amongst Assad's rule untainted by violent extremism. Okay, this is all bullshit.
Wow.
This was all started by the CIA, and the CIA is funding al-Qaeda and al-Nusra and ISIS and Golani. There are terrorists that the Pentagon is directly funding and terrorists that the CIA are funding. And often those two groups will fight each other.
We'll see who's the best.
In Syria. Golani and his group early on claimed responsibility for deadly bombings, pledged to attack Western forces, confiscated property from religious minorities, and sent religious police to enforce modest dress by women. Those are the people that the United States wants to take over, the people doing that. Golani and his HTS have sought to remake themselves in recent years, focusing on promoting civilian government in their territory as well as military action. Researchers, his group broke ties with al-Qaeda. Sure, really? Former al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria seeks to soften its brand.
Oh, like Azov.
They're going to soften its brand. I hear, and by the way, the Washington Post happy to help them soften their brand.
They should get that bear from the Snuggle fabric softener commercials. That snuggly bear.
So they're big.
Makes your fabric so soft.
They're trying to soften their brand. They're starting to sell LGBTQ merch. Kurt, did you hear about that?
Yeah, that's typically the way it's done. Can you imagine if they overthrow Assad? What a disaster that'll be.
That'll be a disaster.
Iran's bad. That's from the last time we overthrew got something much worse.
Yes.
You think somebody better is going to take over if Assad goes down?
By 2018, the Trump administration acknowledged it was no longer directly targeting Golani, but HTS has allowed some wanted armed groups to continue to operate on its territory and shot at U.S. Special Forces at least as recently as 2022. These are the people we're funding. At the crossroads of trade routes and empires for thousands of years, Aleppo, with its bustling neighborhoods and ancient landmarks in the 2010s, saw some of the fiercest fighting in Syria's civil war. It's not a civil war. Aleppo was home to 2.3 million people before the conflict. Rebels seized the east side of the city in 2012, and it became the proudest symbol of the advance of armed opposition factions. In 2016, government forces backed by Russian airstrikes laid siege to the city. Russian shells, missiles, and crude barrel bombs. Oh, not like the classy, sophisticated cluster bombs we give our allies to tear children to shreds in Yemen and elsewhere, but crude.
Wait, they leveled neighborhoods? You mean like Gaza?
Yeah, they're crude.
Now that's wrong.
Crude. They should use
what are these cave bombs.
They should use right. They okay, and methodically leveled neighborhoods, very much like Israel just did in yeah. Starving and under siege, rebels surrendered Aleppo that year. The Russian military's entry was the turning point in the war, allowing Assad to stay in the territory he held.
Oh, that's why we hate them so much.
That's why this year Israeli airstrikes in Aleppo have hit Hezbollah weapons depots and Syrian forces, among other targets. According to independent monitoring group, Israel rarely acknowledges strikes at Aleppo, and right, you know why? Because it's illegal. It's an international war crime. Here, my friend Ashvin Ratanzi says, reminder, the so-called moderate rebels rampaging across Syria are U.S.-backed jihadists.
As are most jihadists. As are most of the jihadists.
Syrian opposition group that killed a child was a U.S.-vetted alliance.
Oh, you don't say.
Remember when Obama insisted that the United States was supporting moderate Syrian rebels and Jake Sullivan told Hillary Clinton that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria? Amid the renewed extremist-fueled violence in Syria, it's time to take a look at the Obama-Biden legacy in the region. Here we go.
All of this had been in the works for quite a while, and I do believe that Obama knew that, even as he went to Cairo in the first year that he was in office back in 2009, and he called for a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect. He knew that the world had just endured 8 years of the Bush administration and its so-called war on terror. Obama was presenting himself as an alternative, saying, here is a new beginning, right? I am going to be different. But he meant none of that. And even as he went on to target the exact same regions of the world that George W. Bush had just targeted, he did it all with Joe Biden, who had already spent a lifetime in Washington, by his side. In August of 2011, Obama announced sanctions against the entire Syrian government and called for Assad to step down. And in December of 2011, Biden was joining Obama in their new slogan, Assad must go. But Assad didn't go. And it did not matter what the U.S. threw at him, from mass protests to media propaganda to claims of chemical attacks carried out by the government to mass sanctions targeting the country. Assad stayed in power. He's still in power to this day. And that is even as the CIA launched Operation Timber Sycamore.
One of the problems with being told blindly to cheer on the Syrian revolution is that the key participants aren't even Syrian, as I've been telling you.
Yeah.
Uyghur-led Turkestan Islamic Party advertising its involvement in the insurgent offensive, participating in the battles extended from Sarkib and Idlib countryside to Morek in North Hama countryside. So this is Turkey's soldiers.
So those are Uyghurs, the oppressed Uyghurs.
Turkish fascist gray wolves are in Aleppo. There they are. Turkish ultranationalist gray wolves in Aleppo. They are tied to the far-right MHP party, known for their extreme pan-Turkish ambitions. Hadi says, so far I've seen videos from Aleppo of terrorists speaking Albanian, Uzbek, Turkish, Urdu, Uyghur, Chechen. Don't you dare compare these NATO mercenaries to the native resistance of Palestine. So this is not a civil war in Syria. It's hilarious that this is an argument made by, so this guy tries to contradict Aaron Mate. He says it's hilarious that this is an argument made by proponents of a government that is on life support and only survives due to the combined efforts of Lebanese, Iranian, Iraqi, and Afghan militias and the Russian government. He's talking about the Syrian government. And Aaron says, to apologists for the dirty war in Syria, meaning that it's being funded by the CIA, for the dirty war in Syria, it's perfectly legitimate for the CIA, Israel, Gulf monarchies, UK, France, Germany, and Turkey to spend tens of billions of dollars arming one of the most powerful insurgencies in history, one dominated by Al Qaeda, and one including thousands of fighters who aren't even Syrian. It's also legitimate for the United States to occupy oil and wheat-rich regions of Syria and impose crippling sanctions that deliberately prevent reconstruction of Syria and further devastate the country's civilian population. So he's saying that this guy is for this. Without this foreign state support, Al Qaeda, without Russia and Iran supporting Syria, Al Qaeda in Syria, now known as HTS, wouldn't have captured Idlib. I mean, without this foreign state support, meaning Israel, Saudi Arabia, Germany, the United States, Turkey, without them backing Al Qaeda in Syria, they wouldn't have captured Idlib and wouldn't have been able to launch its current offensive. According to this same crowd, the Syrian government has no right to request the help of its allies to prevent Al Qaeda-led foreign state-backed regime change. One would call this position hilarious if it weren't so tragic. For this dickhead, it's at least consistent. He works for a place called Newsline Mag, an organization that collaborates with the Pentagon, with the NED, which is the CIA, and State Department. For a journalist covering U.S. foreign policy, that's hilarious. And just to Syrian army recaptures towns in Hama countryside as counteroffensive gains momentum. So good for the Syrian army. So I just wanted to give you that, let you know. There you go. We're doing it again. The United States are the world's terrorists. We're in bed with, we are funding literal terrorists that our own State Department have declared terrorists. Al Qaeda, the people who did 9/11, we're working with them. We're the evil empire. It's not Russia. It's not Syria. It's not Iran. It's not Iraq. It's not Libya. It's not Afghanistan. It's the United States. We're the evil empire. It's not the people of the America don't want this. It's the people who run America, which is the military-industrial complex and Wall Street. And of course, those same people have complete control of our media. Go ahead. What?
They do the same thing here. They brought in all these foreign military-age men to maybe have a they'll call it a civil war.
Yeah.
And it would be a bunch of people from other countries that we blew up here fighting America. That it's the same playbook everywhere. They always talk about Putin playbook. They do the same thing in every part of the world, including this part of the world.
Okay, so now you know what's going on in Syria once again, and my Wikipedia page, which is edited by the FBI, the CIA, and MI6, is going to say, I'm a conspiracy theorist for telling you the truth, while they are the ones who are spreading conspiracies, just like Russiagate, just like the Ukraine war, just like COVID, and now this.
Well, nobody...
Tuesday, December 3rd. Scott Reader is here with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get started with what's going on right now in South Korea. And what's happening right now? The president is talking about martial law. The parliament is against him. And the president is blaming North Korea for that. But what's your take on that?
Look, when the South Korean leader made a decision earlier this year to walk away from processes of reconciliation with the North and instead embrace a very militaristic posture together with the United States and Japan. They formed this trilateral pact, brought in nuclear weapons, directly threatening North Korea. And as a result, North Korea made a strategic decision, I think empowered by its new burgeoning strategic relationship with Russia, to just say no more. It was always the dream of South Korea that it was going to unify with the North. And in doing so, South Korea, with its superior Western democracy and superior Western economy, would would be the West Germany to North Korea's East Germany, absorbing the territory and dominating, the unified peninsula. And Kim Jong Un said, no, we we don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to be we don't want to be part of the South. We are our own nation. We're done. He dramatically blew up the roads and railways connecting the two sides and walked away. And this created a crisis of identity for South Korea, because now, everything that had underpinned what South Korea existed for, that is, unification, is no longer there. And you couple on this the fact that the South Korean president is apparently corrupt as the day is long. So is his wife has some scandals associated with her that have created, political pushback. But now you have people in North Korea, the opposition party, that blames this president for ruining the reason South Korea exists, taking that away. And so in many ways, South Korea became a ship without a rudder and was just sort of floating. And I think the combination of the inability, he was being prevented from passing legislation by a parliament that didn't see eye to eye with him. He was becoming a president that could no longer rule, and would have to face a choice of stepping down at a time when he's under investigation. His wife is under investigation, so he does what dictatorially minded people do over time. He declared martial law. I the last I saw, the commander of the current South Korean military component associated with this declaration has shut down Parliament, but Parliament's not going along with that. Where the rest of the military stands, the Parliament's declared this to be unconstitutional. It's challenging it. So it's still uncertain how this is going to play out. And unfortunately for South Korea, there's a history of military coups, and there's a history of the military using violence on South Korean citizens to retain the power. But South Korea is a nation that's going through a very fundamental identity crisis, and this certainly isn't going to help. It undermines, the United States. Are we in the business of supporting, dictator? Take a look at how we responded, for instance, in Africa and Niger when there was a coup there. We sanctioned them. We had to withdraw our support. Are we going to withdraw American troops from South Korea now? Are we going to nullify the military agreements? This is what we're obligated to do by law. We can't allow military coups to take place. We can't allow martial law to be declared like this. It's fundamentally unconstitutional and undemocratic. But here we are. So, that's the situation. It's extraordinarily destabilizing for the United States and what we were trying to construct, and it's unfortunate for the South Korean people.
Does North Korea have some sort of leverage in South Korea, or they're just talking about North Korea being involved in this chaos in South Korea because the rhetoric is so charming in the eyes of the West?
I think when you say is North Korea involved, I'd say indirectly involved, because there was the promise, there was the hope of unification, and many South Koreans were vested in that promise, in that hope, and indeed, the issue of unification is a fundamental part of South Korean politics and its reason to exist. And so there are, I think, political powers that are resentful, upset, disturbed by the divorce, and they're blaming the standing president. But the idea that North Korea's back there, doing this. North Korea made a strategic shift. They said, we're done with the South. And so I don't think North Korea is more focused on cementing its relationship with Russia, expanding its relationship with China, position itself to benefit from this new economic linkage that could feed into BRICS and have for the first time give North Korea access to global markets that aren't controlled by the West. This is, I think, the strategic direction the North is in, not stirring up trouble in the South. I think what's happening in the South is purely a byproduct of South Korea's fragile democracy and the fragile sense of self-identity.
Do we know about North Korea? Are they willing to? I'm not talking about the leadership, but the overall policy, not just right now, because we had some sort of conflict recently between these two parts. But after all, do you think they're not willing to, if let's assume that in South Korea, the party that is in favor of joining to the North Korea comes to power, is that possible that for North Korea to reconsider their policy toward South Korea?
It depends how serious that party is. North Korea is not going to play the games of the past, because the games of the past were about South Korea dominating the North, South Korea exploiting Northern weakness. North Korea doesn't plan on being weak much longer. So it changes the dynamic. The other thing is North Korea is not going to unify with South Korea that has an American military presence. North Korea is not going to unify with a South Korea that is part of a tripartite alliance that's threatening North Korea with nuclear weapons. So, if South Korea were to divorce itself of its relationship, evict the United States, and then turn to the North and say, we're ready to have talks, North Korea might consider it, but it would not be on terms that South Korea, North Korea is not going to become a colonial possession of the South. North Korea doesn't plan on being exploited. North Korea is building a strategic relationship with Russia. Does the South want to be part of that strategic relationship? I think the boat has sailed. If the South collapses and the North, is called upon to march south and bring order to a peninsula in disarray, maybe there, but then that would be North Korea imposing its will on the South. But the the South blew it. The South blew it. Now you see Donald Trump, talking about, reaching out and reestablishing good relations with North Korea. Again, that ship has sailed. It's just North Korea is not interested anymore. The United States has nothing to offer it. Donald Trump was talking about, the potential of investment. Well, North Korea is getting all the investment it needs now. I just don't think, Donald Trump is able to affect any meaningful change. And the South, they'd have to redefine themselves, who they are and what they're, because the South has always, the concept of unification has always been premised on Southern domination of the North. That's not happening anymore. So I don't think it's a matter of the South simply saying we want to, return to the status quo where we're talking about unification. North Korea is not interested. North Korea said we're not interested in that anymore. It's no longer part of who we are. That's a strategic decision. North Korea is fully vested in its relationship with Russia. That's a strategic decision. North Korea is aligning with the BRICS community. That's a strategic decision. North Korea is not going to allow itself to become, as I said earlier, a colonial extension of the South. That's just not going to happen.
How do you see the role of China in terms of what's going on between Russia and North Korea? As you mentioned, it's so important for North Korea, this new type of relationship between Russia and North Korea. But is China supporting that?
China looks out for Chinese interests. China, I think, will support anything that doesn't destabilize its border region. I think that this new relationship with Russia actually reduces the potential of conflict with South Korea, Japan, the United States, because the underlying tension of unification is gone. I mean, how do you unify? Is the South going to invade the North? Is the North going to invade the South? Right now, North Korea is saying, we don't care. We don't want to do it. It doesn't matter. So they've removed that source of tension. And for and if North Korea is no longer threatening the South, if North Korea just says, you do what you've got to do, I don't care anymore, just leave us out of this, we're headed this direction, that is to the benefit of China. And Russia taking the lead in redefining North Korea's relationship with the world, one that is no longer governed by Security Council resolutions, sanctioning by the United Nations, etc. I think China's going to jump on board that bandwagon, and it'll move forward. But China is not taking the lead in the rehabilitation of the North. That is Russia's role, and Russia and China have long ago agreed that they will each, they're sovereign states and they have sovereign policies. And I think on this one, China's going to take a back seat and wait and see. China has very significant economic relationship with South Korea, and so they're not going to throw that away out of nothing. China will find a balance, and that's what China does is find a balance.
I think that China is in the process of some sort of absorbing South Korea and Japan. Are they trying to do that just to separate them from the United States? Is that?
Well, I don't know about absorbing, but I think they are trying to
redefine.
They don't want the United States, an aggressive United States, at the head of an anti-Chinese alliance that includes Japan and South Korea. And so China is seeking to stabilize relations and emphasize economic relations, play to its strengths, and make the relationship so profitable for Japan and South Korea that that there's no need for war, and Japan and South Korea won't be signing on to any American-led policy calling for the isolation of China, the sanctioning of China, things of that nature. So I think that's the direction they're going. I don't see them at this point in time talking about absorbing South Korea and Japan. That's a big ask, but in terms of creating a environment of peaceful coexistence and peaceful cooperation, yeah, I think that's the direction China's trying to head, and that undermines the United States because, frankly speaking, the United States doesn't know how to peacefully collaborate, peacefully cooperate, or cohabitate with anybody. We have a foreign policy that is driven by the need for conflict. We have to maintain conflict. Why is this situation good? Because we get to profit from the fear mongering that comes from banging the drums of war on the Korean Peninsula and getting Japan to buy more Patriots, to invest in a bigger military, getting the South to continue to do that, creating an arsenal, a Pacific arsenal of democracy that can be weaponized in Ukraine. All these things. This is what the United States does. The United States isn't talking about leading edge technology or developing supply chains or joint infrastructure development programs and things like that. We should be, but we're not. We're all about, we lead with the military. We lead with violence. We lead with chaos, because that's what we need to keep this military industrial complex alive, well, and living. Peace is not our friend, but that's all China's looking for right now is peace. Peace brings prosperity.
In your opinion, when in Japan and in South Korea right now, they're looking at the situation that we have been witnessing in the West Asia, in Ukraine and in Taiwan, when they're seeing this and in their analysis, are they getting ready to be much inclined toward some sort of compromise and cooperation, even more than before? with China, or they're still thinking of improving or even expanding the relationship between them and the European countries together with the United States?
You're talking about Taiwan.
I'm talking about South Korea and Japan.
Okay. Look, Japan and South Korea, but with Japan, taking more of a lead, has been talking about, opening the door towards the Pacification of NATO, if that makes any sense. Getting NATO into the Pacific, North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the Pacific. Japan has been, open to that, and indeed wanted to open a NATO liaison office. South Korea, a little more reticent, but also conceptually considered to be an extension of the rules-based international order, and this tripartite alliance that the United States has put together between Japan, South Korea, and the United States is meant to be some sort of NATO light in the Pacific. As I said, we were trying to turn South Korea into the arsenal of, Pacific arsenal of democracy. We wanted to get them to supply weapons to Ukraine. We are using them to indirectly supply Ukraine by selling weapons to Poland, so that Poland can release older Soviet era weapons to Ukraine. And neither South Korea nor Japan were in a position to tell the United States no on this. They're too much beholden to the United States. It's important. This is why I think the North Korean decision to walk away from unification as a leading principle and focus on redefining its relationship with Russia, both in terms of security and in terms of economic. And on the one hand, it's been used by the West to, for instance, this myth apparently of North Korean troops in Kursk. And no evidence has been provided whatsoever to back that up. In order to believe that happened, you'd have to think that Russia and North Korea would engage in a major strategic cooperation without a ratified agreement in hand. And Russia doesn't normally do work that way. I'm not saying it's impossible, but normally Russia wants a ratified agreement in hand before they do anything for legalities. And Russia and North Korea just recently ratified their strategic thing, and now you have Belousov going to North Korea and meeting with his counterparts. Now things can happen, but I think they got ahead of the gun there. I don't think there's tens of thousands of North Korean troops in Kursk, but the West has tried to play North Korea's betterment of relations with Russia, strategic relationship, and as a global game changer that requires NATO now to work with Japan and South Korea to contain the North Korean threat, which according to them now extends from the Pacific to the Black Sea. But in the end, it's not going to work. I mean, Ukraine's not going to be around forever. This conflict will end sooner rather than later. And then Europe is going to be, compelled to find a new European security framework that's acceptable to Russia, and stability will break out. NATO, I believe, will not survive the loss of Ukraine. And so the concept of a NATO in decline expanding precipitously in the Pacific is a non-starter, which means that Japan and South Korea are going to have to figure out how to go it alone. And I think at that point in time, we take a look at, the cards that China offers versus the cards that America offers. America offers continued, military dominated relationships that always bring up the possibility of war. And China offers economic prosperity premised on the need for peace. And I think that peace will win out over war in the long term, especially once conflict in Ukraine stops, and as long as there's not a new conflict in Taiwan, therein lies the rub. The United States, in order to preserve its relationship with Japan and South Korea, could stir up trouble with Taiwan. Japan has already committed to a policy of coming to the defense of Taiwan. So, there's always that thing. But the United States doesn't, stir up trouble with Taiwan. I think the Chinese are very pragmatic about Taiwan. They take the long view. And I think the Chinese would be more than happy just to let Taiwan simmer, under the belief that economic self-interest will prevail, and that Taiwan will realize that they're better off aligned with the Chinese economy than they are with the American economy. And I think the South Korea and Japan will also gravitate in that direction. That's the danger of BRICS, is that it brings multilateral order and consensus-driven community, premised on the notion of everybody benefits, everybody profits, everybody gets the economic benefit of the relationship, as opposed to the rules-based international order, which the United States promotes, which is all about feeding the American
family
hegemony. We are a global colonial power, imperial power, and we view the world as our global colony feeding us. I don't think that's an attractive model anymore.
We have a new sort of conflict which is related to what's going on in Ukraine between Russia and the West. This new conflict is in the Middle East, is in Syria. How do you see, in 2020 we had an agreement, between a ceasefire agreement between Syrian government and these jihadists, and Iranian called them takfiris. And on the other hand, there was an agreement between Iran, Russia, and Turkey. They have considered these two cities that are right now in some sort of chaos, in Idlib and Aleppo. They consider these two cities as a zone of demilitarized zone. Right now, it's all gone. Is that related? How much of what's going on, let's put it that way, how much of what's going on right now in Syria is related to the conflict in Ukraine?
Well, again, like everybody, I'm a prisoner of the data that's available. And I'm not in a position to independently verify or ascertain the veracity of the data. I put in a filter that removes things that just don't make any sense, things that seem outlandish, conspiratorial in nature, etc. And with what's left, the following picture emerges: that this conflict that's taking place now is a campaign that was meant to be launched in March of 2025. It's a campaign that was carefully planned out by Ukraine, the United States, Turkey, Israel, and the HTS and the Syrian National Army. It was meant to be timed when Ukraine was planning on initiating its own, counteroffensive for 2025. The idea was to create a crisis for Russia, for Ukraine to be involved in military action that would require Russia to dispatch sufficient resources to deal with that, and then hit them with Syria, and Russia would have insufficient resources and would have to peel this off and put Russia in the horns of a dilemma. That, I believe, was the strategic objective. Ukraine was involved in providing advanced drone technology and drone weaponry. If you take a look at the videos on Telegram and such of the Takfiri, the Wahhabists use of drones. You might as well be watching a Ukrainian drone operator somewhere in Kursk or in the Donbass. It's the same tactic, the same weapon, the same effect. The Ukrainians trained these people to do it. And it's a very effective weapon, especially if you haven't been accustomed to dealing with it. While the majority of Russian troops on the line of contact know damn well what these drones are. They've seen them, and they're lethal, but they have developed means of protecting themselves. The Syrians haven't been trained in this. They're still very much vulnerable to these drones. So that was the Ukrainian participation. The Israelis provided strategic guidance. I believe Israel is very much behind the desire to capture Hama and then drive onto Homs. In doing so, severing the landline of communication between Iraq and Lebanon, which is a strategic goal of Syria, of Israel, to starve off Hezbollah. And they provided intelligence support, but I also think we had a case of exploding pagers and walkie-talkies. So clearly, Israel had either used the front that infected Hezbollah, the pagers of Hezbollah, but one would have thought that the Syrians would have done some sort of inspection protocol to make sure that their systems weren't corrupted, but or they set up a parallel scheme to infect Syrian raid. But either way, this was an Israeli initiative to blow it up, and they timed it for this. But I believe it wasn't supposed to be implemented until March. Why act now then? The Israelis suffered a strategic defeat in southern Lebanon. I mean, the Israelis were desperate for a ceasefire. The military was telling Netanyahu, we have to have a ceasefire. We can't continue this. Hezbollah was ready to have a ceasefire because they've been hit pretty hard. But I think the most important thing is that Hezbollah has transitioned away from being a resistance group exclusively into being a political party. And they have a duty and responsibility now to the Lebanese nation and to the Lebanese people that includes not facilitating conditions that manifest themselves in Israeli bombardment of Lebanese civilians, killing many thousands. And so Hezbollah was inclined to accept this ceasefire. Israel was desperate to have this ceasefire. But then Israel, Netanyahu was like, okay, if we do the ceasefire, though, we need to starve Hezbollah. And we have a plan, but that plan doesn't happen until March. I think the Israelis got the United States and Turkey to launch early. Turkey has a strategic relationship with Israel, the Israeli military, and Israeli intelligence. It goes back a long time. Back when Israel was first planning its airstrikes on Iran, Israeli Air Force planes would go to Konya, a Turkish air base in Konya, and fly, strike missions over the Anatolian Peninsula because they could have access to, a land range where they can practice, land navigation and practice the various tactics it would need to go into to Iran. Turkish intelligence and Israeli intelligence are very, very close. We see that in Azerbaijan, where Israel has established a very effective base of operations that's used to launch covert attacks into Iran, whether they be through viruses, through manned assassination, whatever. That couldn't happen without Turkey's knowledge and facilitation. And so there is this relationship, and I think the Israelis were able to prevail and get this attack to launch early. I think this is going to be a fatal mistake on the part of Turkey. Turkey was struggling already to get BRICS membership. They applied and Erdogan took us on, and there was pressure placed on on BRICS? And the answer was no. It's a consensus-driven organization, and people decided that Turkey wasn't ready, not a good fit. And Turkey's not a good fit. And Turkey's a worse fit now because of this, because Turkey, who did they betray? Iran, BRICS member. Russia, BRICS member. Syria, friends with, strategic allies with 2 BRICS members. This was just a stupid move on the part of Turkey, and they're not going to accomplish. This was an act of desperation. Idlib was protected because of the Astana agreements. Now that Turkey has violated the Astana agreements, Idlib can be looked at realistically for what it is, which is a cancerous tumor on the region. And I think this conflict now, by launching the surprise attack in violation of the Astana Accords, the conditions have been reached that Russia, together with Iran and Syria, will be able to eliminate this Idlib monstrosity. It's going to mean a lot of dead people, because what Turkey has created is literally a homeland of terrorism. They brought in people from Turkic countries around the world, Uyghurs from China, Turkmen, etc. And these people are considered terrorists where they come from, so they can't go home. They're horrible people in terms of their violence prone. They can't live in Turkey, but they brought their families with them. And so they've created this safe haven in Idlib. And I think one of the goals of this offensive was to extend the boundaries of this this Idlib terrorist entity to include Aleppo, and then eventually achieve some sort of autonomy linked to Turkey. This would address Erdogan's pan-Ottoman, pan-Islamic vision of where Turkey stands in the world. But that's not going to happen now. Now what's going to happen is that this cancer will have to be excised. And I think you're going to see that Syria will be serious about it this time. Russia will back them up, and so too will Iran. There will never be a chance for HTS or the Syrian National Army to pull off an attack like this again, because I think when this is all said and done, Idlib will be eliminated, and the people that comprise these 2 forces will either be dead, captured, or driven into some sort of exile, around the globe. But it was a huge mistake on the part of Turkey to do this. It was a huge mistake on the part of these various militias to agree to this.
Do you think that the leadership in Iran and Russia were surprised by this move on the part of Turkey? If you remember, before the Israeli attack in southern Lebanon, Turkey was talking about, if Israel goes to southern Lebanon, invade Lebanon, Erdogan said, I'm going to send Turkish army to fight them. And right now, you see the hypocrisy is so thick. And how I'm surprised by, I think everybody is surprised, but how about the leadership in Iran and Russia? Are they surprised?
I respect the intelligence services of Russia and Iran, meaning that I believe that they, especially Iran, monitors the the pulse of the region. Russia had a deal. Iran had a deal, the Astana agreements. And I think they naively believed that deal would hold, that there was no reason to do this. It made no sense. But I'm also certain that they were monitoring the situation. Iran is in a situation right now where they have made a strategic decision that they're going to wait for Trump to be inaugurated before they figure out what the next step is regarding Israel. That they're going to give Trump a chance to use diplomacy to resolve this issue, as opposed to having Iran attack Israel with 1,000 missiles and propel the region into chaos and anarchy. Um, and so I believe they would have been notified that, on briefings, hey, this could be happening, this could be happening. But the political decision was, we aren't going to do anything that justifies this kind of action, like surging troops in. We will be prepared for what occurs. And they've responded, fairly decisively. You have, the popular militia units in Iraq mobilizing tens of thousands strong. The Russians, likewise, I think, were monitoring this, but again, they had the Astana Accords. Russia's not going to violate it. But look how quickly the Russian Air Force and the Syrian Air Force came into action here. And now Russia has a plan. They're flying, airplane loads of bombs into Syria, and they're just going to use their Air Force to blast everything that moves. They brought in a new leader who's familiar with the situation on the ground. So I can't say that Russia and Iran were taken by surprise. What I can say is that Turkey betrayed them. Turkey wanted, if you and I enter into an agreement, you not only have a duty to faithfully abide by that agreement, but you might be inclined to believe that I too believe I have a duty to faithfully abide by this agreement. We may have disputes, we may argue, but at the end of the day, when you get up in the morning, you're thinking, all right, Ritter's going to abide by this agreement. We're going to go have more talks, but Ritter's going to abide by this agreement. And then one day you wake up and find out that I stabbed you in the back. I mean, does that mean you were taken by surprise? Maybe, but you're also smart enough to know that Ritter's acting differently. He's not picking up his phone when I call. He's, slow in returning correspondence. There's, he's hostile. All this, so you'd have red flags going. And I think that's the situation with Russia and Iran. They had an agreement, the Astana agreement. Turkey was behaving funky, but they're not going to be the ones to rip up the agreement. Turkey did that, and now they're reacting, but they're reacting in a way that's going to put HTS on the defensive if they're not already there. And it's one that will, I believe, achieve a strategic Russian victory in Syria, together with the Syrian government and their Iranian and Hezbollah allies.
In your opinion, is Turkey going to be in a position that nobody would trust them anymore? Not in the West, not in the East, because the way that they're behaving right now, I know that in the West, they're not trusting Turkey that much. But right now with the situation in the East, Russia, China, Iran, and what they're doing right now, it's getting much more difficult for the future in Turkey. How because when we talk about Erdogan, everybody says he's so smart, he's trying to play both sides. But right now, it doesn't make sense, because you have to respect, as you've mentioned, your agreement with these. These are not little tiny countries. These are regional and superpowers.
Yeah. I mean, I laugh because I just don't understand what Turkey did here. I know, like all leaders, Erdogan is looking out for Turkey's best interest, but we also know that, there's heavy politics at play here. While he won the presidential election, it wasn't the overwhelming victory that he was hoping for. And his AKP party, is likewise victorious, but also on the defensive. And so there are people out there looking for opportunities to, exploit a weakened AKP, a weakened Erdogan. And so there's a lot of politics at play in every decision he makes, domestic politics. And one of the big issues right now is 5 to 6 million Syrian refugees that are in Turkey. That's causing a huge headache for him amongst the Turkish population. Politically, it's difficult to send these refugees back to Syria unless they feel safe. And right now they don't feel safe. They feel threatened either by the government of Syria, or they feel threatened by the Takfiris that are in Idlib, and yet their continued presence in Turkey is causing a huge headache for the Erdogan. So I think he made some decisions that on the surface look pretty bad from a strategic standpoint, but there might be a short-term politically driven, domestically politically driven imperative that prompted him to do this. Russia, a long time ago, been talking about Turkey, because remember, Turkey, when they started, when this special military operation started, was saying that Crimea is not part of Russia; it has to go back to Ukraine, and that they would supply weaponry. They supplied this advanced drone system, armed drone system, that was very effective against the Russians early on. And yet Russia continued to talk with them, complete the Turk Stream pipeline, get it up and running, work with Turkey to resolve conflicts in Syria, in Libya, to basically have diplomatic relations. And Putin and talked about this. He said, "Look, Turkey is a sovereign nation, and Turkey has its own interests, and so Turkey is going to pursue those interests. And where these interests clash with ours, we will confront Turkey. Where these issues don't clash, then we will, let Turkey get on with its business." But he said Turkey has unique interests that don't necessarily coincide with those of Russia. And that was just something that Putin accepted at face value. And so the idea that Russia would never, ever again negotiate with Turkey as it's currently configured, I think is a wrong notion. Russia, believes in stability, and at some point in time, it will have to sit down at the table with Turkey. But the day of Erdogan enjoying any special relationship with Putin based upon, friendship and trust, I think that day's gone. The same thing with the Iranians. I think Erdogan burned that bridge. It's going to be very difficult for Turkey, Russia, and Iran to get. Now, what about the Gulf Arab states and other regional partners? We'll see. Turkey is more involved regionally than many people can imagine. Turkey has a heavy military presence in Libya. Turkey has a heavy military presence in Sudan and Somalia, and Turkey has a vision of being a regional gas hub, a major player in the global energy market. You're not just going to be able to ignore Turkey. So even though Erdogan has made life as a Turkish foreign minister more adventurous and exciting, the fact is the world can't afford to ignore Turkey. Right now, there was this trajectory of Turkey rejecting the EU because the EU rejected Turkey, and Turkey trying to join BRICS, even though it was, BRICS was seen as a competitor to the G7, which is sort of an economic extension of NATO. So it made people say, wait a minute, if Turkey's doing all this, what about their NATO membership? If Russia and Iran and others come down too hard on Turkey, Turkey's just going to go retrograde right back into pro-West alignment. So I don't think strategically that's what Russia, Iran, and Syria want. And so I do think you're going to see a willingness to continue to negotiate with Turkey to resolve this issue and to peacefully coexist. But it's going to be a tough one because Turkey has betrayed everybody.
When we look at 2017, in those days, the situation was much worse than what is right now, because these Takfiris were just capturing each and every part of Syria. And on the other hand, we had some sort of animosity toward Syria from the Arab states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, all of the countries. Right now, the situation is totally different. Do you think that is that going to be considered by the United States, or they're still hoping that they can overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria?
You know, the Biden administration has been rather schizophrenic on this issue. Early on, they took a hands-off approach that you know, you have to respect the sovereignty of Syria and ensure that you know Syria's interests are preserved. And then they turned around and said Bashar al-Assad is a brutal dictator with blood on his hands. So I think the United States has made it clear that it doesn't believe in the sovereignty of Syria, and that it wants to come in and make sovereign choices for the people of Syria that include getting rid of Bashar al-Assad. You know, we have a history of funding Syrian opposition groups, Sycamore Timber, I can't remember the order, CIA operation to divert you know, weaponry from Libya into Syria through Turkey, a multi-billion-dollar operation. You know, we've helped create the Free Syria Army and train and equip it, and we've directly and indirectly armed and trained you know, elements that are today fighting under the banner of Al Qaeda in Syria. We've been an active participant in this conflict. Regime change has been the policy of the United States. That's the whole reason we're there. You know, we occupy northeastern Syria to deny Damascus, you know, the revenue from the oil wells that are located there. We use that oil to prop up the Kurdish autonomous area government that is in power in that region. Everything we do is geared towards a regime change in Damascus. You know, Trump has spoken about the need to remove American troops from Syria. Without further dialogue, one has to assume that that means that under Trump administration, regime change is no longer the stated policy objective in Syria, that, you know, we could live peacefully with a Syrian government that was ruled by Bashar al-Assad. But we don't know exactly what Trump is going to do. We do know that the Biden administration seems to have endorsed a policy of you know, pursuing forceful regime change in Syria. It looks like the policy's failing, but I don't know what the future holds for Donald Trump. He you know, he's brought in some very bad people who I don't think would, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, the direction as the director of national intelligence, which is not a policy making position, it's intelligence gathering. With the exception of her, there's nobody in Washington D.C. and Trump's circle that's sympathetic to the you know, to keeping Bashar al-Assad in power, the necessity to keep him in power, and you know, allow a sovereign Iraq to continue to provide basing opportunities for Russia, and to has a strategic military relationship with Iran. I don't think the Trump administration's mature enough to accept that kind of reality.
The situation between Israel and Lebanon right now, it seems that ceasefire is not respected by Israelis. They're attacking whenever they want, but at the end of the day, they're just intimidating the government in Syria or Hezbollah. If you attack us, we're gonna do whatever we want, and we're gonna attack you again. We're gonna invade Lebanon again. How fragile is the situation right now? Is it going to last longer? How long does it take to just put an end to this ceasefire, temporary ceasefire? Okay,
the situation's very fragile right now. We have dogs barking at an Amazon delivery truck that
you want to go take care of it.
I don't think he's coming to my house. I think he just cruised by and the dogs are on alert. But let's see if they. Let me go resolve this issue. You can entertain your audience. I'll be right back.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. So, Hunter is free. And it is an excessive pardon. It is a big pardon, unprecedented. Even Politico are saying we haven't seen a pardon as sweeping as Hunter Biden's in generations. So we're going to be going through this today, guys, a little bit of the history, because I think that this is actually a lot deeper than people even realize. Unless you've been following it very closely, this whole entire story for a little while and trying to put the pieces together. It's not just that Hunter picked up a few felony charges and Joe Biden's like, oh, screw it, I'm nearly out of office and I'm old, so I'm just going to pardon him because he's my son. No, actually, this could be a major piece of one of the biggest political scandals that the United States of America has ever seen. And there are so many different facets to it. So we need to go back to 2013. But before we get there, guys, I want to quickly remind you to smash that like button on your way in. It does help me out a lot. And also subscribe to the channel if you are getting value. And don't forget, guys, the Reality Based store has some of the most based and sexy merch in the whole entire world that would even make Hunter Biden want to put some clothes on. Our counterculture line is my favorite, some traditional designs there, and it's just the perfect Christmas gift, as well as the MAGA Wars hoodie. You guys got to get your hands on this one. It's great material, really good quality, and just a fantastic gift for anybody based that you know. So anyways, back to the video. 2013, Viktor Yanukovych is the president of Ukraine, and he's not exactly what the liberal West wants. In 2013, he refuses to sign the EU Association Agreement. This agreement with the European Union would have been a key step towards closer economic and political ties with Europe. Instead, he opted for increased cooperation with Russia. This decision was seen as a rejection of European integration and sparked the Euromaidan protests. And actually, we're seeing something pretty similar happening over in Georgia at the moment. There are massive riots over there, and it's all to do with the Georgian government being a bit more pro-Russian and pushing back any sort of application for EU membership. But that's a bit beside the point. So shortly after rejecting the agreement, Yanukovych negotiated a $15 billion loan with Russia and also a significant discount on natural gas prices. This decision further signaled Ukraine's desire to align with the Russian economic orbit as opposed to the West. And also, Yanukovych was outspoken about being anti-Ukraine joining NATO, and he maintained a strict policy of neutrality for Ukraine.
As for Ukraine joining NATO, this issue is not currently on our agenda. I think that now we must repair the deficiency which we had in our relationship with Russia. The future relations I see between Ukraine and Russia are the relationship of friendly countries. A partnership.
So long story short, the Euromaidan or the Maidan coup happened in February of 2014. The US installed a loyalist government and ousted Viktor Yanukovych. And if you guys want to learn more about that, there's a documentary called Ukraine on Fire by Oliver Stone. It's on Rumble. But at this time, VP Joe Biden, during the Obama administration, was already dealing with Ukraine, and he visited Ukraine many times in 2014. And you can see photos from that, and you can also read transcripts of the meetings that he held in his official capacity. Anyways, March of 2014, Russia annexes Crimea, where they already had their Black Sea Fleet. And in April of 2014, conflict breaks out with Russian separatists in the east of Ukraine in Luhansk and Donetsk. So, I mean, you make up your mind as to when this war started. Anyways, May of 2014, a young man by the name of Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian natural gas company.
You have to fight the cancer of corruption.
And I mean, it's pretty simple, but Hunter's commercial dealings in Ukraine and also in China, for that matter, also concern somebody else. And that somebody else is the big guy. And Who is the big guy?
And then it has 10% for the big guy held by H. I 1,000% sit here and know that the big guy is referencing Joe Biden. That's crystal clear to me because I lived it. I met with the former vice president in person multiple times.
Who did you infer that the big guy may be?
So all I can do is speak to the evidence there. What I can say is I think I know what you're referring to is when we're preparing for that,
for the big guy,
preparing for that interview, and we're referencing that email, 10 held by H for the big guy. And from what I understand that to be his dad, President Biden.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I just want to ask Mr. Shapley a similar question because the AUSA Wolf interjected, and I'm reading from your transcript now, and said she did not want to ask about the big guy and stated she did not want to ask questions about dad, quote, in quotes. Who did you take dad to be when she refers to dad?
The father of the subject is President Biden.
This message doesn't call Zhang Chairman Zhang, does it? It just says the Chinese want to do business with the Bidens. As a matter of fact, it says both coming to be my partner, to be partners with the Bidens with an S. He, Zhang, has implied that the number one has made it clear and available to him. Who is the number one?
The number one is Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping, the president of China? Yes or no? The leader of the Communist Party, the CCP?
Yes.
Is the number one?
Yes, that's the number one that Hunter was referencing in that message.
So a lot of these business dealings actually came to light through whistleblowers, but also through Hunter Biden's laptop. You remember that laptop that was Russian disinformation?
It is so obviously a Russian operation.
So obviously disinformation.
So obviously a Russian plot. Tell me why it's so obviously a Russian plot to you.
This is just classic textbook Soviet Russian tradecraft at work.
Right, exactly. And this is classic, very classic Russian disinformation tactic.
Your classic disinformation campaign.
We shouldn't look at it as anything other than a Russian disinformation operation.
The laptop that was such Russian disinformation, actually, that the FBI contacted Meta during the 2020 election and had completely suppressed, which most likely, if that had have actually gotten out, it would have cost Joe Biden the election. Because, I mean, if you guys have seen what's on that, it's pretty concerning. And this laptop was the same laptop that was eventually used in court against Hunter Biden, meaning that the FBI, who were in possession of the laptop, knew all along that it was completely legit. Yeah, so I mean, the last 10 years in what some call Project Ukraine, a war happened. You may have heard about it. The US government has been funneling and is still trying to ram some through, by the way, tens of billions of US taxpayer dollars to the United States backed and controlled government in Ukraine to fight the Russians in a war that they never stood a chance of winning, which has cost the lives of hundreds and thousands of young men. But I'm sure this is all just a coincidence. And Hunter Biden, just wrong place at the wrong time. And actually, I'm sure that Hunter was just a fantastic candidate for the job at this giant Ukrainian natural gas company.
The deeper scandal is it even relates to that same Biden family dynamic that I described. Think about this. Hunter Biden was sitting on the board of Burisma. This is a Ukrainian state-affiliated energy company that Hunter Biden had no business sitting on the board of. And yet that is the exact same country that Joe Biden, the puppet, directs hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money to afterwards. If the same shoe fit the other foot and this was a Republican or, God forbid, Donald Trump, imagine what the reaction would be.
And this is probably also why Joe Biden had to get Viktor Shokin, Ukraine's prosecutor general, fired. Biden threatened to hold $1 billion in loan guarantees to Ukraine if they didn't fire Shokin, who was at the time running an investigation into corruption, and in particular, corruption in big oligarchies and corporations like Burisma.
Cancer of corruption.
And the investigation would have been directly involving Hunter Biden.
They made, I mean, I'll give you one concrete example. I was, not but it just happened to be, that was the assignment I got. I got all the good ones. So I got Ukraine. And I remember going over convincing our team or others to convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
So in simple terms, Ukraine has massive oligarchs. After the Euromaidan revolution, the United States was now the biggest player, the biggest power holder in Ukraine. So these oligarchs, in order to gain favor with Joe Biden and to ensure that they're not investigated and prosecuted for corruption, did the big guy a favor and got young Hunter on board. And now that Project Ukraine is over, I think that we're likely to see quite the fallout in terms of the power structures in Ukraine over the next few months or few years. So, I mean, keep an eye out for that. But you see, the reason why this is so scandalous is not just because it means that Hunter won't be prosecuted. It means that Joe Biden won't be investigated and prosecuted. You see, all roads lead to Joe Biden, obviously, when it comes to Hunter Biden's commercial dealings overseas. So now they're not going to be able to go after Hunter. And what's more is that if they're not going to be investigated as they should be, then we may actually never know the extent of the corruption that has taken place between the Biden family and other US politicians for that matter, and the country of Ukraine and their government, their oligarchs, and this war.
Well, I guess Hunter Biden could walk right out today and say, yep, it was mine. Doesn't matter. Blanket pardon, blanket immunity. You gotta love it, folks. An absolute blanket pardon. And that's the plenary power of the president when it comes to pardons at the federal level, too. No president can have their pardon overturned. So what does that mean? So that means it's an absolute power of the presidency, plenary power. So the Supreme Court can't overturn it. Congress can't overturn it. The next president can't overturn it. In fact, Joe Biden himself can't even overturn this pardon because that's the way it's written, folks. That's the way it works. But Jill wasn't worried about Hunter. She didn't care about Hunter. She cared about Hunter going public. Jill and Joe were trying to save their own tails. That's what's going on here. And it coincides with everything. That's why it goes all the way back to 2014. The CIA coup of Ukraine, covered. The biolabs, Metabiota, covered. CEFC, the Chinese energy concern, covered. The CCP deals, covered. All of it covered. Kazakhstan, Russia, the Moscow mayor's wife. It's all covered, folks. Every single bit of it.
But guys, just relax. Joe obviously has nothing to do with Hunter's business dealings. I mean, Hunter, although he's now moved on to greener pastures and to his real passion of finger painting or whatever he's doing, was at the time an expert in natural gas.
Have you ever spoken to your son about his overseas business dealings?
I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings.
I don't discuss business with my son.
I did my job. I never discussed a single thing with my son about anything having to do with Ukraine because I've never discussed my business or their business, my sons or daughters, and I've never discussed them. I have never discussed with my son or my brother or anyone else anything having to do with their businesses.
You see, Joe Biden has spent the last 4 years overseeing a lawfare campaign against Donald Trump. He thought that if he got rid of the enemy, then the light would not shine on his own corruption. But boy, was he wrong, and now he has faced a pulverizing defeat. Donald Trump won the election in a landslide, and he has gotten the boys together. The Allied bombers are looming overhead. Joe Biden is hiding in his Munich bunker, but instead of eating the cyanide capsule or surrendering, he flees to a colony in Argentina. You see, it's no surprise that this pardon comes just after Trump has nominated Kash Patel to be head of the FBI. The Biden family knows that they have to cover their tracks ASAP, and that this pardon, being irreversible, cuts off the potential for an investigation at the knees. And it also actually might explain a few other things, such as the massive amounts of aid to the tune of billions and billions being rammed through to Ukraine at the moment, and all of the long-range missiles. Perhaps it's a parting gift by Joe Biden, incentive to maybe shred a few files and have a big bonfire, because apparently it does get pretty cold in Ukraine at this time of year. So with that out the way, let's have a look at some of the media reactions. But we must start with some of the disgraced American left saying that Joe Biden would never pardon his son.
Your son Hunter is on trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution. But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
The president would not pardon or commute the sentence for his son, Hunter. I just want to make sure that that is not going to change over the next 6 months. The president's saying it would not.
It's still a no. It's still a no.
It will always be a no.
It's still a no. It will be a no. It is a no. And I don't have anything else to add. Will he pardon his son? No.
Asked directly, and he has said he wouldn't pardon his son if he gets convicted.
Let's wait and see what happens if he loses.
Yeah, but he said it.
He's going to get pardoned by his dad. There's no question about that.
The president has ruled out pardoning his son.
Major commitment from the president, accepting the outcome of the trial and also pledging not to pardon his son.
So the challenge for him is really to continue to live up to his values when it was really personal, and he did that today.
It seems like a pretty normal, straightforward answer, but it takes new weight when we see what Trump is saying about the outcome of his trial, what we're hearing from other Republicans who say they don't accept the jury's verdict here in New York.
The contrast is profound. The current president of the United States has so much respect for the law that he has said he would not pardon his son.
Joe Biden's gotten asked about, talking about law and order. He's gotten asked if he would pardon his son. He has said no. On the other side, you've got Donald Trump, who has said that he will pardon the January 6th insurrectionists. Yeah. They're not even his sons. They're just sons of bitches.
Whoopi Goldberg also has come up with some very profound logic.
I respect it as a parent. I understand why he would do it, but I wonder to understand why lie about it for so long.
I'd stop calling it a lie.
Okay, why repeatedly say you're not going to and you do? And secondarily, for the part of this country, half of it that doesn't support Biden, doesn't know him personally, doesn't get to have phone calls, and they're just looking at a system that seems like it's only benefits the people who are in power.
I'm going to say,
what precedent does that set?
Well, here's what it says. It's a precedent for all of us to open our eyes, because we've elected someone who is in a similar situation, who didn't have a drug problem, who knew what he was doing, who clearly stood and said, I can do this. And he did it. So I think for many, many reasons, this is very different than any other situation that we have ever dealt with.
Wow, so profound there by Whoopi. I'm actually sitting here, having watched that, reconsidering my entire worldview after that just amazing wisdom by Whoopi. And last but not least, guys, Scott is still on fire, absolutely ripping into these CNN hacks who are just, for whatever reason, refusing to yield and are still dying on the Joe Biden and Democrat hill. Let's check it out.
Karen, you just heard Democrat Greg Stanton, Democratic governor of Colorado, Jared Polis. There are Democrats saying they're not happy that President Biden made this decision.
Yeah, well, tough. The president went ahead and did what he thought was right for him and to protect his son. And I think there are going to be Democrats who, from a political perspective, are going to feel like they may have to say something, but who probably on the inside understand why President Biden went ahead and did this. And I got to tell you, the crowing from Republicans, and I know my dear friend Scott will have plenty to say about this, but we're talking about, Donald Trump is a convicted felon who literally had pardoned his daughter's father-in-law and just made him ambassador to France. So if we're going to talk about, who's using what system in what fashion, let's put it all on the table and let's be honest about the fact that Donald Trump doesn't really have a leg to stand on in this one.
So, Scott Jennings, what about that? Steve Bannon, Charles Kushner, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, and Charles Kushner not just pardoned, but also apparently about to be nominated ambassador to France.
Joe Biden is leaving office making the strongest possible case for Donald Trump that anybody could possibly make it, and that's that our government and our justice system is of, by, and for the elites and nobody else. He ran to banish Trumpism from our political system in this country, and he has left it politically and now institutionally the strongest possible political force in this country. It is a complete and utter failure by the head of the Democratic Party and the President of the United States. Never again do I want to hear, oh, Donald Trump's a liar. You can't believe anything he says. Donald Trump will abuse his power. Donald Trump will only use the system to benefit himself and his family and so on and so forth. Never again. I have one question for Karen, and that is, why did he need an 11-year blanket pardon going back to 2014 when Joe Biden was the vice president? We are sitting on the biggest cover-up of who knows what crimes, and Joe Biden amazingly knows exactly, roughly, when it started. He knows just about when it all started. He's leaving office in complete and total disgrace. He is a liar, and there is no other way to spin this today. This has nothing to do with Trump and everything to do with the character of Joe Biden.
Let me give some context to what Scott is saying just there, Karen, before you address it, because this pardon, I do not believe we have mentioned it, not just granting clemency for the crimes for which Hunter Biden was convicted of illegally purchasing a gun, of tax evasion, but also a blanket pardon for any federal crimes that may have been committed basically between 2014 and 2024. So what about that literal get out of jail free card for a 10-year period, Karen?
Well, look, literally, the president recognizes that Republicans have been for years now trying to attack the president himself, go after his family. And when you have someone who literally ran their campaign on retribution, on the idea of I will be your retribution and getting back at his enemies, I would imagine, obviously I haven't spoken to the president about this, but I would imagine the president took a look at this and said, I want to make sure this is ironclad, that there is nothing that can be done to circumvent what I'm going to do to protect my son and to try to take the target off of his back once and for all. So that's my reading of it. But again, I think that the hypocrisy here, it is astounding. I mean, Donald Trump has said and done things, said things that and done other things. And again, he's a convicted felon himself. He has used his power to benefit his friends, his wealthy allies. In this instance, we're talking about a man who decided to take care of his son after years of unrelenting attacks. I don't blame him.
Scott, did you have the same concerns over a justice system for the elite, as you put it before, when it was Donald Trump pardoning Steve Bannon, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, Charlie Kushner? Same concern then?
Listen, you guys can spend all day long trying to spin this, that this is Donald Trump's fault, that this is somehow caused by Donald Trump. Oh, he's appointing the wrong people. Oh, he did it. Oh, this is the worst possible thing a president could possibly do to his party and to the country, to sit for a year and say, I will not do this. I will not do this. The rule of law is sacred. We have to respect the justice system. Juries, we have to respect juries. We have to respect the guardrails and the norms of our democracy. These people are liars. Inflation is transitory. Afghanistan, it's a success. The border is secure. Robert Hur is a liar. The videos are cheap fakes. Biden has a cold. He'll never drop out. Oh, I'll never pardon Hunter. It's all a lie. It is all a grift. Every American, except the most partisan, brain-rotted people, are going to be outraged by this today. He is going to leave off. You think 38, 39% job approval is bad? Just you wait. Just you wait. He's disgraced today. Outrageous.
You don't need to, but Scott, you don't need to hurl names and say people like me are brain rotted. Come on, that's a little beyond the pale, even for you, Scott.
Listen, I
disagree. We can disagree.
You don't have to defend this. He's leaving office. You don't have to defend it. You don't have to die on this hill. You can say this is wrong because everybody knows.
What are you gonna do?
Are you fine with the lying? Are you fine with him sitting before the election all year and lying to the American people? Are you fine with the lying about it?
I don't think that he was lying. I think he made a decision after the fact and decided this was the right thing for him and for his family. Period. Full stop.
John,
Donald
do
Trump
we not
decided
have
that
the
it
minutes
was okay to pardon.
Joe Biden, Karine Jean-Pierre, how many minutes of tape do we have of both of these people telling the American people this will not happen? It's I mean, we could play it all morning. It's a lie, and it's a lie to benefit his own family, and that's
fine,
all
but
that it
let's
is.
just-
And everybody who went on TV and said, oh, look how he's the modern George Washington. He's drained every ounce of credibility from every surrogate. If Karine Jean-Pierre had an ounce of self-respect, she'd get off the plane in Africa today where they're going so he can avoid the press and resign. He's drained all of her credibility, and everybody else who's defended this, it's draining for them forever.
So, guys, lots more to still play out with this story over the coming days and months. Hope you enjoyed.
Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes, I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Is there any possibility that the president would end up pardoning his son?
No.
Well, is there,
I just said no. I just answered.
When would the president pardon or commute his son if he's convicted?
So I've answered this question before. It was asked of me not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I was very clear, and I said no.
You said before the president would not pardon his son. Is that still the case?
Nothing has changed. That is still the case. I could speak for the president, and he said he would not pardon his son.
Does the president have any intention of pardoning him?
We've been asked that question multiple times. Our answer stands, which is no.
3 weeks later.
That didn't age very well, now did it? There's an old saying that adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. 2 weeks ago, Mika the Bigot Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough, after several years of back and forth with Trump and at least as many years of claiming that he's a wannabe dictator, turned on a dime and behind their viewers' backs slithered off to Mar-a-Lago to bend the knee to the Orange Man. Whatever happened to all of their morals? Whatever happened to all of their standards? Did they forget what he is and what he had done? Go back and watch the video that I did about this. I started by showing you how Mika was on The View just before the election, saying that this was going to be the end of American democracy, and the only sane thing to do was to oppose Trump. You can't compromise with a dictator. And then a few weeks later, she was explaining that you have to talk to dictators and find areas where you can compromise. This is what for white supremacy passes for morals and ethics. White supremacy has no morals or ethics. It has no principles. All it has is moral relativism and situational ethics. The old, I'm white and I say so. Whatever they say on Monday, they'll say something else on Tuesday, then something else entirely different on Wednesday, and then on Thursday go back to whatever is on Monday, because it's all about whatever is expedient to their power in the moment. And if that changes day by day, then so be it. White power will pretend to abide by its own rules, we'll call them laws, and its alleged principles right up until the moment that things don't go their way. Then after that, they'll abandon all of it on the spot. But you know what? Mika and Joe aren't the only ones feeling the heat. Joe Biden's under pressure too. With Trump's imminent return to the White House, and with him front-loading the FBI with hardcore ideologues, and with Republicans controlling the Senate and the House, but most importantly the Senate, the Orange Man is going to be holding all the cards come Inauguration Day. And after being made to endure all manner of investigations, prosecutions, lawsuits, and humiliation, it's understandable if the most vindictive man in politics decides to give his political enemies a taste of the same. Now, the easiest target among the Democrats would obviously not be a politician at all, but rather one of their kids, in this case, Hunter Biden. The white right had been focused on him for years because he's dumb and lazy. I guess it runs in the family. Now, in case you're new to my morning briefings, Hunter Biden was convicted in June of this year on 3 felony charges related to an application for a gun that he bought some years back. On paper, he could have been looking at many years in prison. But as the son of a president, it's inconceivable that he'd get more than a few years, that is, if he got put in prison at all. And why was he looking at prison time? Because he had already pleaded guilty to tax evasion earlier, so he wasn't a first-time offender. While he was running, or rather shuffling for president this year, Biden was repeatedly asked about whether he would pardon Hunter Biden should he be convicted. Even Karine Stank-Pierre was asked about it at White House press briefings. And both Biden and Pierre repeatedly said no. Biden himself said that he would respect the jury's verdict, whatever it was. That's what he was saying at the time. But of course, as with everything else Biden has said, that was a lie. Hunter Biden hasn't even been sentenced yet, by the way, but that didn't stop Biden from issuing a full, complete, all-pervasive pardon for his little felon. Biden's pardon covers all offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in from January 1st, 2014 through December 1st, 2024. Now keep in mind that period of time covers a lot more than just the period of tax dodging and coke-fueled gun purchases that Hunter was making. This pardon goes all the way back to Barack Obama's second term, 2014, and that's significant for one reason. Hunter Biden joined the board of the Ukrainian gas company Burisma Holdings in April of 2014, during Obama's second term when Joe Biden was his vice president. And what this pardon also does by having that time frame listed, it proves that Joe Biden was lying all these years when he claimed that he didn't know anything about his son's dirty business dealings in Ukraine. This pardon proves that not only did he know, he and Hunter have talked about it. That's how he was able to give such a specific time frame. Bigot Biden crafted a pardon that would specifically encompass the entire time that Hunter was dealing with Burisma. And if you think Biden hasn't been getting any of that Ukrainian money, you're an idiot. The last 30 days of any presidential administration are notorious for being a time when presidents hand out pardons like so much government cheese to the biggest crooks in federal prison, and Biden has proven to be no exception. Now, Biden and his sycophants have been screaming that, well, he had to do it after all. This was all a political witch hunt. It was all political, don't you know? The only reason Hunter was even being investigated was as a way to attack Biden during his presidential campaign. Well, let me tell you what actually happened. Hunter Biden had already confirmed to the feds that he was dodging taxes in December of 2020. This was shortly after Biden had been elected. As the son of a former vice president, he was given special treatment. 2 years probation is the terms of his plea deal, and they were also working out a plea deal on the gun charges that he was looking at too, which also would have included no jail time. The tax evasion plea deal went smoothly enough, but things fell apart in June of last year when it was time to finalize the gun charges plea deal. The judge on the case, who was a Trump nominee, was very skeptical of the deal, feeling that it was highly unusual, and she was very reticent about signing off on it. As a result, Merrick Garland felt compelled to name a Trump-nominated U.S. attorney as special counsel, and Hunter Biden was indicted on 3 felony charges. First, for lying to a federally licensed gun dealer by claiming on the application form that he wasn't a drug user. The second charge was for the actual submission of the fraudulent application to the gun dealer, and the third was for Hunter Biden possessing the gun for 11 days despite knowing he was a drug addict. Hunter Biden's not the only junkie in the Biden family. I've done video essays about the other drug addicts in their family, but Hunter Biden's drug addiction is particularly well known, especially since he's made headlines about it, had scandals and scrapes with the law as a result of it. In 2014, Hunter Biden was kicked out of the Navy after he tested positive for cocaine. This while his father was vice president. In June of this year, Hunter Biden went to trial and was found guilty on all 3 federal felonies. Hunter Biden was indicted by his father's Justice Department and convicted in court by a white jury. This is what Joe Biden is calling a politically motivated persecution of his innocent little boy who didn't do nothing wrong. You've heard the facts, the real ones, not the spin that the left corner of the white media has been trying to tell you. So tell me, where's the injustice? His fellow white folks heard his case and said that he was guilty. Even if you want to claim that the prosecution was politically motivated, which would be a hell of a stretch considering that Biden is president and it was his own Attorney General Merrick Garland who called for the special counsel. My question is, was that white jury also politically motivated too? Were they some sort of political lynch mob? Were they in on it too? Now, for the sake of argument, if you want to claim that this is lawfare, just keep in mind, this is the exact same argument that Donald Trump has been making. So not only is Biden giving Trump all the cover and excuses that he needs to go ahead and do all the same stuff that's been happening to him, he's also made it where anyone who wants to object can't, because Biden's been taking the lead on all this stuff. I don't care for the orange man or Biden's drug-addicted creep of a child. I do care about the fact that Joe Biden was the one who wrote the '94 crime bill, or Biden's law as he called it, And that was the set of laws that established all of these draconian punishments that he's now trying to weasel his little son out of. As a result, he's made sure that his kid's never going to have to spend a day in prison, even though it was proven that he was guilty in court. Biden can't deny that he did it. He's claiming that, well, the punishments are extreme, this, that, and the third. He was the one who wrote the punishments. And if Biden's suddenly scared that his son would be harmed in prison, then it sounds like Biden should have made prison reform a priority during his administration. You've had people rotting in prison for crimes they didn't even commit. Hunter Biden would be going to prison for crimes he actually did. And you've had people mistreated in all kinds of ways, mostly black people, and Biden didn't give a two-bit damn about any of them. In fact, back in the 90s, he reveled in it. He loved the fact that, oh, these people are getting what they deserve. So spare me the phony bleeding heart routine for Biden, his little brat. He was the biggest cheerleader for harsh punishment, and he didn't care about the treatment of prisoners until there was the possibility that his son was going to become one of them. But make no mistake, the gun charges are only the tip of the iceberg. The overwhelming reason that Biden wanted to make sure that there was an all-encompassing pardon for his son was because of Burisma. This whole thing with Ukraine is actually blowing up in their faces, literally. The war over there isn't going so well. Last thing that anybody needs is for somebody over there in Ukraine to start blabbing. And with Joe Biden leaving and Donald Trump coming in with a huge political mandate, it's not hard to see that the Orange Man's going to be on a revenge tour. And part of that tour is no doubt going to be going through Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky has all sorts of problems already. The last thing he needs is Trump cutting him off. Last time, Trump merely delayed weapon shipments to Ukraine, demanding that the Ukrainians open some sort of investigation into Hunter Biden, even though the Ukrainians made it clear that they didn't really have anything to open an investigation with, not to mention they themselves didn't want to have to open up their own culpability. But even though Trump did relent on that demand, keep in mind, it was precisely his withholding of weapons to Ukraine and demanding some sort of investigation into Hunter Biden be announced by the Ukrainians that was the reason for his first impeachment. Trump hasn't forgotten about that, and I'm sure that he would love to have some way to be able to point and say, see, he was as dirty as I told you that he was. That's what's going through Trump's mind right now, and even if it's not, it's certainly what's going through Biden's mind. Trump is going to have a golden opportunity and plenty of motive to force the Ukrainians' backs to the wall and tell them that he can force them into a peace deal with Putin that will allow Putin to keep the 20% of their country that he's already conquered. And that being the case, the Ukrainians would have to basically live with that unless they were willing to tell all the dirty dealings about Hunter Biden, in which case he would see what he could do about getting Putin to back off a little bit. That's the kind of deal that I can easily see the Orange Man forcing the Ukrainians into. And especially when he makes it clear that he's not interested in sending them any more weapons. Keep in mind, Biden's been using every little presidential and executive order maneuver that he could to basically circumvent Congress as far as sending weapons to Ukraine goes. Trump has no such motivation to keep those weapons flowing. In fact, he has plenty of motivation to cut them off. And unless the Ukrainians can offer Trump something really juicy, what incentive does he have to keep the weapons coming in? That's the position that he's going to have, the upper hand. That's what's actually going on here. That's the part that Biden and his cheerleaders in the left corner of the white media don't dare talk about. The political and most of all, legal consequences that the Biden family is open to as a result of their dealings with Burisma. They don't want anyone opening that can of worms. But knowing Donald Trump, if anyone would dare, he would. Now, for the mushy-headed shills around here who are still desperately hoping for a Democrat consulting gig or to become a staffer for one of them, tell me this. Even if Hunter Biden was guaranteed to be sent to a proverbial country club federal facility to serve his 2 or so years in prison, do you seriously think that a racist, inveterate liar like Joe Biden would be saying anything different from what he's saying today? Sure, you can go ahead and claim, well, he's concerned about his son's safety. He's talking as if people are already beating the guy up now. He's not even in prison. So even if he was sent to the safest country club that you can imagine, do you really think that Biden would be saying anything different than what he's saying now? Of course not. In fact, even if Hunter didn't go to prison, even if prosecutors had merely let him off with a guilty plea, do you think Biden wouldn't have commuted the sentence regardless and claimed, well, Hunter's name shouldn't be tarnished because this is all just a politically motivated witch hunt. It wasn't even that serious. Why, they didn't even see fit to send him to prison. That's how unserious this is, etc., etc. Just a witch hunt. So no matter what Biden may try to claim, he would have wound up here regardless, no matter what. Anything other than the prosecutors dropping all charges would have resulted in him giving some sort of pardon or commutation of sentence to his son. That would have happened regardless. But the consequences for the Democrats are actually going to be extending far beyond this, because now nobody's going to be able to accuse the orange man of unfairly using his position to give his pals legal immunity, even when the Supreme Court inevitably decides to side with the guy who put half those justices on the bench. What's going to happen is they're going to say, hey, Joe Biden did it, we can do it too. And they'll be right. Even if I was so simple-minded as to go along with the narrative that Hunter Biden was being politically persecuted, that he was being unfairly targeted, this was all just a witch hunt, and that Joe Biden had every moral, rational right to pardon him, you still can't reconcile that with the fact that Joe Biden never gave the same consideration to anyone else. So this isn't about morality. It's Biden doing like every other politician inside the Beltway, using his position to make sure the criminal justice laws never touch him and his. That's one of the perks of the job, don't you know? And if you still want to insist that this was somehow morally justified, well, truth be told, that doesn't matter even in political terms. In order to manufacture some sort of justification for this, you would have to come up with a nuanced argument. And the American people don't do nuance very well. Half of Americans simply aren't that sympathetic to Hunter Biden, and the other half of America hates the Bidens altogether. And miss me with these suck-ups who say Biden's already had to bury 2 of his sons. He simply can't bear to lose a 3rd child. He was looking at like 2 years in prison. That's all that Hunter Biden was reasonably looking at. They weren't going to put him on death row. And most importantly, Hunter Biden's been in trouble about drugs for decades now. His father wrote the laws that made it where he was subject to these punishments in the first place. If he wants to be mad at someone, he should be mad at himself. He was convicted by a jury of his peers, a white jury. This clown's been getting himself into run-ins with the law and kicked out of the Navy because he refuses to clean up his act. But then again, look at who his father is. And when I look at Hunter Biden, I see a lot of things, but the one thing I don't see is a victim. He's not a victim of anyone. No one is persecuting him. He's been a selfish brat who's relied on his racist father's political position to keep him out of trouble his entire life. And he has reveled in this legal immunity all these decades. And by the way, his being in the Navy wasn't because he enlisted and went through boot camp and everything. He became a naval reservist at the cutoff age in his 30s because his father got it for him. His father pulled some strings as usual and got Hunter Biden whatever he wanted. And yet he was still so disrespectful, so entitled that he threw that away, his little would-be vanity project, which was nothing more than a vanity project for him, just a way for him to claim, I was in the Navy, you know, that's how they do it under white power. They just simply sit here and give these guys things that they didn't deserve and didn't earn, and that's okay, nobody will call them out on it because complexion for the protection. And now it's come time for the Biden family to have to live under the laws that Joe Biden himself wrote. And he tells the world that he wrote those laws to punish black people, not so that he would have to live under those laws himself. Millions of Americans have been in prison or have people they care about who are. And they've made the exact same pleas that Biden made about the treatment of their loved ones. And Biden's 94 crime bill was the main contributor to intensifying those terrible conditions and supercharging the prison industrial complex. All of these states, by the way, they signed on to Biden's law because, as Biden explained it, all you got to do is go ahead and use the federal government's power of the purse, or as they called it, the Truth in Sentencing Statute, wave $13 billion under the states' noses, which is what he did with the 94 crime bill, and those states will eagerly change their laws so that they can go ahead and get some of that sweet federal cash. And that's what happened. But of course, Simone Sanders lied through her teeth on CNN, claiming that, those were the states, that wasn't the federal government, until even Victor Blackwell had to tell her, look, we already know that's how Biden structured the 94 crime bill to incentivize the states to change their own state laws so that they could get that federal cash. And at that point, she was running away, well, the law's not perfect. Oh, we know the law ain't perfect. It was written by an inveterate racist. And you know what Biden previously said? He said, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. And that the system isn't perfect, but it's the only one we got. Well, actually, it's not, because there isn't one system, but actually 3. There's one system for black people, another for white people, and then a third one for white people with money and or the right connections. Well, one thing's for sure now. With this stunt, the whole country's finding out exactly what Biden's law actually is. Laws for thee, but not for me. Good day.
here's what they say the problem with this Joe Biden pardoning his own kid. It says the pardon power. Hey, by the way, can you type this into Google, see where this came from? The pardon power may be abused in at least 4 distinct ways: by placing the president above the law. What? Of course the president's above the law. That's why no president's ever gone to jail, except for Trump. They tried to.
We haven't had a legal war since World War II. We haven't had a war.
That's right. We haven't had a war.
How is that possible?
By violating individual liberties protected by the Bill of Rights and preventing courts from enforcing orders to protect those rights. Also, by violating generally applicable federal crime statutes, including by using pardons to obstruct justice or as a bribe, and by licensing lawbreaking on the president's behalf, which is exactly what this is.
From Protect Democracy.
That's from Protect Democracy. What is Protect Democracy?
So they're a nonprofit organization based in the
Okay.
United States, a nonpartisan group.
I guess if they caught you taking a bribe to give a pardon, of course, we all know people get bribed all the time to give pardons. They just do it in ways that they can't trace it.
Or blackmail, as in the case
Or-
of Mark Rich.
Or blackmailed. So here's what Kevin Dalton says. He says Joe Biden pardoned his son Hunter because he was unfairly prosecuted. That's what Joe Biden said. Joe Biden
What?
said he was unfairly prosecuted.
Trump was in 2017 to make it unfair.
Right. He's saying that the only reason that they prosecuted Hunter was because it was political. And I'm not kidding. Even though Joe Biden's in charge of the Justice Department as this happens. Joe Biden pardoned his son Hunter because he was, quote, unfairly prosecuted for tax evasion and a gun charge in 2017 and 2018. So then why does the pardon go all the way back to 2014? Did you know that, Kurt?
No.
Yeah. Hunter Biden's pardon seems to needlessly extend from 2014 to 2024. He gets a 10-year window of criminality.
And well through 2030. He's pardoned ahead of time.
So that's well before and after his unfairly prosecuted cases. Oh, yeah. Hunter started working for Burisma in 2014, which is his job on the energy board in Ukraine, which we all know was to funnel money back to himself and his father and his uncle. We all know this now.
Jimmy, people sit on energy boards. That's a real rebuttal
Yeah.
that I heard on MSNBC. People sit on energy boards. Okay.
So if it was just for his gun charge, and if it was just for the tax evasion, why? Which that was in 2017 and 2018. Why does it all go back to 2014? Well, here's why. So why did Joe Biden pardon Hunter all the way back to 2014? Well, in April of 2014, Hunter Biden received his first payment from Burisma Energy to represent them. They also purchased a car for him. May 2014, Hunter Biden and Devin Archer, remember Devin Archer did that interview with Tucker Carlson, and he spilled the beans and said, yeah, it's all about influence. Then if Devin Archer began receiving $1 million a year to work on the board and broker a deal in Ukraine. Later that year, Hunter Biden began receiving millions more to his Rosemont Seneca account. In 2014, Joe Biden attended a dinner, Devin Archer talked about this, with the people who sent these payments into D.C. Multiple members of the Biden family received these payments. Some were from other members of the family. This pardon wasn't just for Hunter. This pardon was an attempt to end all investigations into the Biden crime family. Will Donald Trump finally bring justice to this corrupt family? The answer is no, that's not going to happen. But here I want to talk. What are they talking about? The Biden crime family. Well, Kanoka the Great said this is a represent. So do you remember this? I remember this. We reported this when there was a congressional committee that was looking into the Biden crime family. And of course, it got poo-pooed and that almost got zero coverage. So, so here is Representative James Comer. He's going to highlight Hunter Biden laundering millions of dollars through 20 shell companies while operating as an unregistered foreign agent. and 6 banks filing over 170 suspicious activity reports with the Treasury, accusing him of money laundering and human trafficking. Did
Who's
you know
this guy think he is? Israel?
right? And then Representative Jim Jordan points out that the Justice Department's prosecutors acknowledged. And so remember when they made that deal with Hunter? And the judge goes, hey, whoa.
Yeah.
This deal is, have you ever made a deal like this in the history of the Justice Department? And they had to go, no, we've never made a deal like this. So that's when the judge canceled the deal.
Right.
So that's when the new plan went into effect. The new plan was, okay, we'll have Hunter plead guilty, and then we'll delay his sentencing. And then before he actually goes to jail, his father will pardon him.
Right.
This is the stuff they accused Donald Trump of doing.
Wait, that's a conspiracy theory. He's not going to pardon him, Jimmy. I know it literally just happened in reality, but I choose to believe.
Am I
You tell
telling
on yourself?
Am I telling on myself, Kurt? So here, let's listen to it.
The judge did the right thing. Today was a victory for justice in America.
So this is when the judge threw out the plea deal he had with the Justice Department because it was rigged in Hunter's favor, and there was never a deal like that in the history of the world.
The judge did the right thing. Today was a victory for justice in America. If anyone was watching the whistleblower hearing that we had in the oversight with the 2 credible whistleblowers, I mean, they laid out perfectly a series of crimes that the president's son had committed. It's not just about tax evasion, and the tax evasion that they're getting on was just for 2 years for a W-2. It didn't even include all the shell company income that they've had that no one knows what the reasoning is behind the millions of dollars they've received from foreign nationals. It didn't include the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is one of the things that we said back in January. Jim Jordan and I said,
I mean, it's not disputed they got millions of dollars from foreign nationals from other countries, and he wasn't registered as under the FARA Act, which is Foreign Agent Registration Act. They didn't do it.
Yeah.
But
the clear law that the president's son had committed. You also have the money laundering. Remember, 6 banks filed reports with the Treasury Department that they suspected this family was involved in laundering money from state-owned entities. State-owned entities are foreign countries. So the list goes on and on and on. It's obvious to anyone who has any knowledge of the law that the president's son's committed a host of crimes, and all roads lead to Joe Biden. That's the other thing. And that was, I think, one of the most interesting things from the testimony that Jason Smith got in the transcribed interview and we heard in the hearing was they wanted to interview Biden family members, and they felt pretty strongly that this was directly linked to Joe Biden.
And
On Monday.
So Joe Biden is really pardoning himself.
Yeah.
So he's pardoning Hunter, but there's also a secondary pardon because if anybody investigated what he just talked about, the millions of dollars of 20 shell companies, the money they got from Ukraine, China, every place else, they would lead back to Joe Biden. And so if he gives them a pardon starting in 2014, which is when he started working for Burisma and his no-show job on an energy board, and then remember Joe Biden got them to fire. There was a prosecutor in Ukraine that was investigating Burisma. Joe Biden got them to fire that prosecutor.
Withheld billions from
He
them.
withheld at least $1 billion from the country. And the exchange was, we'll give you this money, but you have to fire this prosecutor. And the front story, the cover story was, oh, the prosecutor's corrupt. No, the prosecutor was investigating Hunter and the company he worked for.
Yeah.
The level of corruption you can't even imagine.
That's, by the way, Trump was impeached for holding up funds to Ukraine.
That's right.
To look into Biden holding up funds to Ukraine.
That's right.
Trump's impeachment, I mean, talk about a bullshit impeachment.
Here we go.
Your committee will take a sworn deposition from Devin Archer, the former business partner of Hunter Biden, and we expect him to testify that on 24 occasions, he can recall Joe Biden being used by Hunter to call into meetings with foreign business deals with the foreign business partners, the same Joe Biden that swore that he never once talked to his son about his foreign business dealings. Congressman Coleman?
Yes, there's a lot of speculation that that's what he's going to say. But remember, one thing Jason Smith pointed out, these lawyers have intimidated many of the witnesses that we've tried to bring forward for depositions and transcribed interviews. And they've told them things like, you're only going to implicate yourself. We're not going to get in trouble. Hopefully the witnesses, like Devin Archer and the others who we're going to be bringing before the committee this summer, hopefully they saw what happened in that court today. and that these lawyers aren't going to continue to get away with the shenanigans that they tried to pull yesterday when they lied and said they were part of Ways and Means staff to get something removed. Those days are over, and we're in control of this thing. And I believe if these witnesses will come forward and tell the truth, I think the American people are going to be in for a big eye opener.
Well, Devin Archer did get intimidated because he told Tucker Carlson one thing, and then when he testified, said another. But here we go.
Joe Biden.
Now, Congressman Jordan, your investigation in the Judiciary Committee is running in tandem with Congressman Comer's investigation into the Biden family businesses, and that is the weaponization and how the FBI has been politicized, weaponized, the DOJ has been politicized, weaponized. They didn't even want to hear from the whistleblowers, and they're willing to make that sweetheart deal. I don't think that's a deal that anybody else in America would be able to get. Does this now add to the long list of special treatment the Bidens have gotten?
Well, yeah, and the judge asked the fundamental question. She asked the prosecutor, she asked the folks from DOJ, has this kind of deal ever been put together before? Is this unprecedented? She asked, has it ever happened before? And the prosecutor's answer was, no, Your Honor. No. So it hasn't. He responded back, this is complete. This is why what Chairman Comer said, this is truly a win for equal application of the law, which is a hallmark of this great country, the greatest country ever. That's what we're supposed to focus on. And that was the motivation of Gary Shapley and Mr. Ziegler. They came forward because they saw unequal application of the law. That's why we want to talk to these folks, get all the facts, and then move forward from there.
Hey, you know what? They didn't prosecute the former president, vice president for approving of torture,
which
is a crime. So why would they do anything about this?
So Clint Russ, it's not about prostitutes. It's not about being his son. It's not about smoking crack. It's not about gun charges or taxes. It's about Joe Biden using Hunter Biden as the CIA's bagman in Ukraine for every corrupt activity you can imagine. That's why he was pardoned. I'm sure that had a lot to do with it too.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way you're that bad of a drug addict unless you were forced to do some horrible, horrible shit for the family.
Here's how Biden economics works. Bidenomics, you pay your taxes. I send it to Ukraine. They send it back to Hunter. Hunter gives it to me.
Didn't he refinance his home like 4 or 5 times? Some crazy amount. He has like 4 mortgages. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do not remember that. No.
It's a bizarre thing with his house. Like he really does have a crime, like an Enron going on.
And let's remember, Joe Biden it told you 40 years ago he's a whore.
I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but you have to go to those people who have money, and they always want something. You run the risk of deciding whether or not you're going to prostitute yourself to give the answer you know they want to hear in order to get funded to run for that office. I went to the big guys for the money. I was ready to prostitute myself in the manner in which I talked about it. But what happened was they said, come back when you're 40, son.
Well, guess what? He's over 40, and he went back.
Go steal some speeches, son.
Yeah.
Come back when you stole a good speech.
Yeah.
Ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
And what else? What else you think was on that Hunter Biden laptop?
Underage girl. What can you tell us about that?
This is not just any underage girl. This is a family member. And there were several figures that we have seen on this hard drive who have questionable ages, but none of them could be verified as far as who they are, except this one. And that's Natalie Biden. She is the niece of Hunter Biden. And the pictures.
Did you know this, Kurt?
Yeah.
You know that
the family is a dark, evil family. Okay. Yeah, I know. I don't want to get you in trouble with whatever, but yeah, that's all real. It's not conspiracy. That's what was on his fucking laptop. Most people think the laptop wasn't even real.
So there was
Most people go, you think that's real?
It's been confirmed it was real. So there was photographs of his 14-year-old niece, his niece.
Yeah. Well, he went after his brother's wife.
And
Why would
he
go
was
after the niece?
he was actually having sex with that 14-year-old's mother, which was his brother's wife.
Yeah. They like to keep it in the family. Showers, nieces, all of it.
Watch this. So
depict her in ways that are very questionable enough that we here at OAN submitted a request to the Newcastle County Police Department in Delaware. And we asked if they had received any notes of concern about the images that were found on these hard drives, on this laptop, concerning Natalie Biden, who was 14 years old at the time. I cannot go into too much detail as to what the pictures actually depict, but they're enough that we know for sure she was 14 years old at the time because there's date stamps on these pictures. And this is around the time that Hunter Biden was spending time around not only Natalie, but her mom, who he was carrying on a romantic affair with at the time. This is the wife of the dead brother, Beau. Very uncomfortable pictures, Kara. So we had,
Yeah, Beau, by the way, was the good son. That guy, he busted the worst pedophile in American history out of Philadelphia. He prosecuted him, and he prosecuted a DuPont for essay on his own children. And then the judge just let the guy said that DuPont wouldn't do well in prison, so the judge let him go. And then he was dead not long after that. He didn't go into politics like his dad wanted. He became a prosecutor that protected kids, and apparently he did really good work. The good son, and
then he was dead.
So then he's dead. It's not from Iraq, that like Joe Biden lies and says. He got a sudden brain tumor out of nowhere. I mean, I guess that's just chance, right? And then next thing you know, the dark son is banging his wife and doing God knows what with his knees. Fucking gross. Beau Biden probably was a good guy from everything I can find.
Yeah.
He was sincerely trying to put a stop to some bad stuff that it looks like, I think the Biden family is directly involved in, especially with the Ukraine connections, which, as you recall, that was the world's foremost place to traffic.
For human trafficking.
Yeah, was Ukraine. I mean, it's in movies. It's a cliche. It's a fucking cliche that the Ukrainian war brides and what. I mean, you think that could be anything good having Hunter Biden?
So now that's all can never be investigated or prosecuted because of this pardon. Just so you know. Hey, I don't need to tell you that our current state of healthcare system's awful.
The rapid strengthening of the Russian Federation in the Arctic haunts the United States. Over the past 12 months alone, Washington has taken quite serious steps to escalate the situation in this strategically important world region. In particular, neglecting the United Nations Convention, Washington unilaterally expanded the boundaries of the continental shelf, stating that these vast territories are the property of the United States. According to Washington, this continental shelf is allegedly a natural continuation of the land territory of the United States. The new territories that the United States has declared its property occupy an area of about 1 million square kilometers. This is twice the size of the state of California. The U.S. decision to expand its own borders in the Arctic region angered both Russia and Canada, as these countries also claim these territories. According to the first deputy chairman of the Federation Council Committee on International Affairs, Vladimir Jabarov, Russia will never recognize the so-called new U.S. territories. According to him, Moscow will firmly defend its interests regarding the ownership of these territories. Vladimir Jabarov noted that Russia has much more rights to these territories than the United States. At the same time, he stressed that the unilateral expansion of borders in the Arctic is unacceptable, as this could lead to the outbreak of a global war. According to Vladimir Jabarov, the United States must respect international laws and, above all, prove the geological affiliation of these territories, as Russia did at the time. However, judging by Washington's actions, the United States is not going to follow international laws on the Arctic issue. After carefully reviewing the new U.S. Arctic strategy, which the Pentagon published this summer, it becomes clear that Washington is ready to defend its interests in the Arctic from a position of strength. Let me remind you that in the last 5 months alone, the United States, together with other NATO members, conducted 3 major military exercises in the Arctic, making it clear to Russia that the West is not going to abandon this strategically important region of the world. Moreover, insiders in Washington claim that Donald Trump is seriously considering buying Greenland and turning this largest island in the world into a powerful fortified area of the United States in the Arctic region. It is reported that at the moment, the United States is exerting enormous pressure on Denmark so that Copenhagen sells this island to Washington. If Denmark agrees to sell Greenland to the United States, it will be a big problem for Russia's northern fleet. The fact is that the Americans can build numerous military bases in Greenland and, with the help of naval sonar, block the entrance to the world ocean for Russian submarines. In this regard, Vladimir Putin decided to hedge his bets and ordered the construction of 5 new military bases on islands in the northwestern part of the Arctic, including the archipelagos of Franz Josef Land and Novaya Zemlya. In addition, Russia is also conducting secret negotiations with Denmark, trying to convince Copenhagen of the danger of the decision to sell Greenland to the United States. It is reported that only thanks to these negotiations, Denmark is still refusing to sell this island to Washington. According to retired U.S. Army General Daniel Hokanson, the United States has already begun preparing for a possible clash with Russia in the Arctic. At the same time, he noted that climate changes, such as global warming, will only intensify the confrontation between the United States and Russia in the Arctic region. Moreover, it is worth noting that many representatives of the American establishment share the opinion of this retired U.S. Army general. According to them, a collision between the United States and Russia in the Arctic is simply inevitable. A few days ago, U.S. Senator Angus King said that the Arctic, due to the rapid melting of ice, could soon become the center of a global confrontation with Russia, just as the Mediterranean Sea used to be the center of a showdown between states and peoples. Meanwhile, the White House has already begun to develop a new strategy for presence in the Arctic region. Against this background, Russia continues to modernize and create new types of Arctic weapons, making it clear to its so-called Western partners that Moscow is not ready to compromise. Last week, the heavy nuclear-powered missile cruiser Peter the Great of the Northern Fleet entered the Barents Sea, where another military exercise relating to the anti-submarine and anti-aircraft training began. This battlecruiser is the largest nuclear-powered warship in the world. The capacity of this nuclear power installation is such that it could provide electricity and heat to a city of 250,000 people. The crew of this battlecruiser is 744 people and equipped with powerful weapon systems, which, however, will soon be upgraded. Right now, a deep modernization of another heavy nuclear-powered missile cruiser Admiral Nakhimov of the same project is being completed. This modernization led to the birth of essentially a new warship. In the process of modernization, all systems of equipment and weapons were replaced. Now, Admiral Nakhimov has received the opportunity to place Zircon hypersonic missiles, Onyx universal anti-ship missiles, and Caliber cruise missiles on board, which have proven themselves as a high-precision means of destroying ground targets. Admiral Nakhimov also received a modern anti-aircraft missile system of the new generation Redut, with a range of up to 150 kilometers. And the latest universal artillery system AK-130, with a rate of fire of up to 20 to 86 rounds per minute, allows Admiral Nakhimov to hit the sea and coastal targets at a distance of up to 25 kilometers. The battlecruiser also received the opportunity to carry 3 helicopters on board, Ka-27, Ka-29, and Ka-31. It is also worth noting the appearance on Admiral Nakhimov of the latest mine torpedo, anti-submarine weapons, and multiple launch rocket systems. The warship is equipped with the latest radars, digital communication systems, and a powerful onboard computer, capable of independently assessing the situation and predicting the course of the battle. Meanwhile, the Americans are also preparing for a confrontation in the Arctic. And there are good reasons for this. This region is very rich in hydrocarbons, metals, and other resources. However, the basis of the U.S. Navy, consisting of an aircraft carrier strike group, is not adapted to combat operations in the northern latitudes. The United States also doesn't have a nuclear icebreaker fleet. Russia has a great advantage in this regard and seeks to build it up. In addition to modernizing the existing fleet, Russia is also actively building a new one. So, one of the leading enterprises in Russia, Sevmash, is now working in 3 shifts, producing new submarines. The pace of construction of submarines in Russia has reached the indicators of the Soviet era. Russia is also creating fundamentally new types of weapons. For example, such as the new multiple launch rocket system, based on the Arctic all-terrain vehicle DT-30 Vityaz. In Russia, the icebreaking fleet, including civilian ones, is also all preparing the mistakes of the past. Thus, as you can see, Vladimir Putin has created a fairly powerful bridgehead in the Arctic region, giving the next generations quite powerful levers to counter Russia's enemies. In addition, Putin also made it clear to the United States that if Washington does not reverse its decision to expand the boundaries of the continental shelf, Moscow will unilaterally declare the Gakkel Ridge, the Lomonosov Ridge, and the North Pole Zone Russia's property. Well, my dear truth seekers, as you can see, the battle for the Arctic is in full swing. And amid all this, we can only hope that the confrontation of superpowers in this strategically important region of the world will not lead to the outbreak of World War III.
The United States has implemented stringent export controls aimed at curbing China's access to critical technologies, particularly in the semiconductor and AI sectors. These measures, including blacklisting major Chinese firms like Huawei and SMIC, broadening the foreign direct product rule, and restricting the export of advanced semiconductor manufacturing tools, were intended to protect U.S. national security and maintain technological dominance. In response to U.S. policies, Beijing has intensified trade friction with Washington by imposing a ban on exporting certain key materials crucial for high-tech and defense applications. The move, seen as a response to the U.S. tightening technology-related sanctions on China, was announced by the Chinese Ministry of Commerce on Tuesday. Before diving into the details, let's first discuss the current U.S. policy and examine why it has not been successful. Why the policy has failed. The U.S. restrictions pushed China to prioritize self-reliance. Substantial state investments in research and development have enabled firms like SMIC to achieve significant advancements in semiconductor manufacturing. Domestic innovation in AI, quantum computing, and telecommunications has surged, driven by increased funding and government incentives. China has strengthened ties with non-U.S. technology providers and countries not fully aligned with American policies, such as Russia and some European and Asian nations. Through strategic partnerships and initiatives like the Belt and Road, China has diversified its supply chains and reduced reliance on U.S. technology. The extraterritorial scope of U.S. export controls has strained relationships with key allies and partners. Companies like ASML and TSMC have sought to reduce dependency on U.S. technologies to avoid being affected by the restrictions. Major U.S. technology firms, including NVIDIA, AMD, and Lam Research, have reported significant revenue losses due to reduced access to the Chinese market. The policy has curtailed U.S. companies' economies of scale, potentially undermining their global competitiveness over the long term. Despite the export controls, Chinese companies have launched advanced products that showcase technological sophistication. For example, Huawei's new AI chips and smartphones incorporate cutting-edge designs and manufacturing processes. China's indigenous innovation strategy, supported by state-led initiatives and international collaborations, has spurred remarkable progress across multiple industries. When did the trade war start? The trade war between the United States and China, initiated during President Trump's first term, represented a significant shift in their economic relationship. The conflict was marked by the imposition of tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods, disrupting trade flows and creating uncertainty in global markets. It began in 2018 when the Trump administration imposed tariffs under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, citing intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and unfair trade practices by China. The U.S. also pointed to its large trade deficit with China, which exceeded $375 billion in 2017, as evidence of these imbalances. The initial wave of tariffs in July 2018 targeted $34 billion worth of Chinese goods, including machinery, electronics, and industrial products, to which China retaliated with tariffs on U.S. agricultural products like soybeans and pork. By the end of 2019, the U.S. had extended tariffs to $550 billion worth of Chinese imports, covering a broad range of consumer goods such as electronics, textiles, and toys, while China imposed tariffs on $185 billion worth of U.S. exports. These measures significantly increased costs for U.S. businesses reliant on imported goods, often passing the burden onto consumers in the form of higher prices for everyday items. China's retaliatory tariffs heavily impacted American farmers, especially soybean exporters, who saw their sales to China plummet as Beijing turned to alternative suppliers like Brazil. The U.S. government provided over $28 billion in aid to farmers between 2018 and 2020 to offset these losses. Economically, studies indicated that U.S. consumers and businesses bore much of the tariff costs. For instance, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York estimated in 2019 that tariffs cost the average American household $831 annually. Meanwhile, Chinese exports to the U.S. declined in key sectors such as machinery and electronics, prompting Beijing to implement measures like diversifying its export markets and increasing domestic consumption. After 2 years of escalating tensions, the U.S. and China signed the Phase 1 trade deal in January 2020. Under the agreement, China committed to purchasing an additional $200 billion of U.S. goods and services over 2017 levels, with specific targets for manufactured goods, agriculture, and energy products. It also pledged to address intellectual property concerns and eliminate forced technology transfers. In return, the U.S. suspended planned tariff increases and reduced some existing tariffs. However, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted trade flows, and by the end of 2021, China had fulfilled only 60% of its purchasing commitments. The deal also left unresolved issues like state subsidies and industrial policies. The trade war had broader effects on global supply chains, prompting U.S. companies to diversify their sourcing to countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico. It also accelerated economic decoupling, with both nations striving to reduce interdependence. China pursued self-reliance in critical industries such as semiconductors, while the U.S. sought to bolster domestic production of strategic goods. Although the trade war did not fully achieve its goals, such as significantly reducing the trade deficit, it marked a turning point in U.S.-China relations. It highlighted deep strategic tensions that continue to influence bilateral policies and global economic dynamics. Trump re-election and pressure on China. As newly elected president, Donald Trump has vowed to impose stricter measures against China, doubling down on policies targeting Chinese products and critical technologies. In a dramatic escalation, the Chinese government announced a complete ban on the export of critical materials to the United States, including rare earth elements essential for the production of electronics, electric vehicles, and advanced weaponry. The restrictions cover materials such as gallium, germanium, antimony, and super-hard substances, all of which are integral to industries like semiconductors, satellite technology, and night vision equipment. In addition to these bans, China indicated plans to impose stricter controls on graphite exports. China, which accounts for over 70% of global rare earth production, has used its dominant position as a strategic countermeasure. The ban will likely have wide-ranging implications for United States industries and global supply chains. Impact on U.S. industries. The ban on rare earth exports has sent shockwaves through United States manufacturers dependent on these materials for production. Industries such as aerospace, renewable energy, and defense are scrambling to find alternative sources with limited success. Prices for rare earth materials have skyrocketed, creating supply chain bottlenecks and threatening the competitiveness of United States companies. Accelerated global supply chain realignment. China's retaliation highlights the risks of over-reliance on single-source suppliers, prompting United States allies to reconsider their positions. While some nations may align with the United States, others could seek closer ties with China to avoid being caught in the crossfire. The fragmentation of global trade networks could weaken United States influence and disrupt long-standing alliances. China's strategic leverage. By leveraging its dominance in critical materials, China has underscored its ability to retaliate effectively against United States restrictions. This move not only neutralizes the impact of new United States measures, but also strengthens China's negotiating position. The ban signals China's readiness to escalate economic confrontation if provoked further, raising the stakes for future policy decisions. Domestic political and economic challenges for the United States. Trump's aggressive stance risks alienating segments of the business community and United States allies who depend on stable trade with China. Industries reliant on Chinese goods and materials face mounting costs, threatening jobs and growth domestically. The economic blowback could undermine the administration's promises of reviving United States manufacturing and protecting jobs, creating political challenges at home. Let's take a quick pause. If you've enjoyed the video so far, could we ask a small favor? Hitting the like button helps us reach a broader audience, and sharing your thoughts or feedback in the comments makes an even bigger impact. Thank you for watching. Now, let's dive back in. New currency war of U.S. and China. President-elect Donald Trump has issued a stern warning to the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, against efforts to establish a new currency that could challenge the United States dollar's global dominance. He threatened to impose 100% tariffs on these countries if they proceed with such plans, emphasizing that any move to replace the dollar would result in significant economic repercussions, including restricted access to the United States market. China, as a leading BRICS member, has been actively promoting the internationalization of the Chinese yuan, renminbi, to reduce reliance on the United States dollar. This strategy includes encouraging the use of the yuan in global trade and investment, establishing currency swap agreements with various countries, and launching yuan-denominated financial instruments. Notably, China has urged Middle Eastern oil suppliers to accept yuan for oil transactions and has implemented policies to facilitate the yuan's use in cross-border trade. In pursuit of financial independence from United States-based institutions, China has played a pivotal role in the BRICS bloc's initiatives to create alternative financial systems. A significant development is the establishment of the New Development Bank, NDB, headquartered in Shanghai, which aims to provide resources for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging economies. Additionally, China has been instrumental in promoting the use of local currencies in trade among BRICS nations, thereby reducing dependence on the United States dollar and mitigating exposure to currency fluctuations and geopolitical risks. These efforts reflect China's broader strategy to enhance the yuan's role in the global financial system and to build financial infrastructures that operate independently of traditional Western-dominated institutions. However, the United States government views these moves as potential threats to the dollar's supremacy and has signaled a willingness to employ economic measures such as tariffs to counteract them. The evolving dynamics between the United States and BRICS countries underscore the complex interplay of economic policies and geopolitical strategies in the contemporary global economy. BRICS members' efforts. China is not the only nation pursuing this move. Russia has intensified its de-dollarization strategy. The country has increased the use of the ruble and other non-dollar currencies in trade, particularly with China and other BRICS nations. Additionally, Russia has been a strong advocate for creating alternative financial systems to diminish reliance on the United States-led global financial infrastructure. In December 2023, Iran and Russia finalized an agreement to conduct bilateral trade using their national currencies, the Iranian rial and the Russian ruble, instead of the United States dollar. This decision aims to strengthen economic ties between the two nations and reduce their reliance on the dollar, especially in light of the extensive United States sanctions imposed on both countries. The agreement was solidified during a meeting between the central bank governors of Iran and Russia. It facilitates the use of non-SWIFT interbank systems and the establishment of bilateral brokerage relations, enabling banks and businesses in both countries to process transactions directly in their local currencies. This move is part of a broader trend among nations to de-dollarize their economies by promoting the use of local currencies in international trade. For Iran and Russia, both subject to United States sanctions, this strategy is particularly significant as it provides a mechanism to mitigate the impact of these sanctions and enhance financial sovereignty. In addition to this bilateral agreement, Iran signed a free trade agreement with the Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union, EEU, on December 25, 2023. This agreement aims to eliminate customs duties on 90% of goods traded between Iran and EEU member states, further integrating Iran into regional economic frameworks and reducing dependence on Western financial systems. These developments reflect a strategic effort by Iran and Russia to build alternative financial infrastructures that operate independently of United States-dominated systems, thereby enhancing their economic resilience amid ongoing geopolitical tensions. India is exploring the use of local currencies in trade to mitigate exposure to dollar fluctuations. The Reserve Bank of India has implemented mechanisms to facilitate international trade settlements in the Indian rupee, aiming to promote its use in global transactions. South Africa supports the BRICS initiative to use local currencies in trade and investment. The country is involved in discussions to establish payment systems that reduce dependence on the dollar, aligning with the broader BRICS strategy to enhance financial sovereignty.
I will impose whatever tariffs are required, 100%, 200%, 1,000%. They're not going to sell one car into the United States.
We're turning to the car industry now because the US and Europe have been going after China recently for unfairly propping up its electric car industry.
Why are other countries objecting to China's grand plan to become a technology superpower?
Is the US pushing the world into a new Cold War? You see, for decades, the US has been the puppet master, pulling the strings of global trade, economy, and politics. But what if we told you that the very tactics America used to stay on top, sanctions, trade wars, and all the other goodies, are now backfiring in the most unexpected ways? Yeah, we are talking about the US digging itself into a hole so deep it might not be able to climb out. Stick around, and I'll show you exactly how it happened. Let's get started. The US has played a dangerous game for years, throwing sanctions like confetti, imposing tariffs like they're candy, and pushing nations around like it's still the 1990s.
I will impose whatever tariffs are required, 100%, 200%, 1,000%. They're not going to sell one car into the United States.
But guess what? The world is finally waking up and saying, we don't have to take this anymore. Countries are waking up to the fact that they can build alliances, create their trade routes, and thrive without playing by Washington's rules. Welcome to the multipolar world, where the US isn't the center anymore. As we dig in, we're going to look at how these backfiring strategies are pushing nations to rebel against the old guard. The result? A world that doesn't need the US to thrive. And that's a problem the US is only beginning to realize. So, How are U.S. sanctions backfiring? Sanctions were once the ultimate weapon in the U.S.'s global arsenal. Need to make a country bend to your will? Slap them with some crippling sanctions, freeze their assets, and watch them squirm. The problem? That strategy is officially broken. Take Russia, for example. The US slapped sanctions after the Ukraine crisis, thinking it would isolate Moscow and force them to cave. Instead, Russia teamed up with China and turned the whole situation into a global challenge to the West. Enter BRICS, an economic powerhouse that's getting stronger by the minute and starting to act as a counterbalance to the Western financial systems that have long dominated global trade. You know what's funny? While the US was trying to punish Russia, they were busy building an alternative global financial system with China. Russia, along with its new best friend China, is slowly distancing itself from the US dollar, with both countries working on digital currencies to make sure they're never held hostage by the US again. And did we mention that they're pushing for other countries to do the same? Suddenly, the US is getting a taste of its own medicine. But wait, it gets juicier. Countries like Brazil, India, and even Iran are jumping on the BRICS bandwagon, all because US sanctions showed them that they don't have to rely on the US to survive. Instead of isolating nations, these sanctions have forced them to come together, creating a new world order that doesn't depend on Washington's whims. And you know what's coming next? The US is watching this, and it's scary. You want to talk about a miscalculation? Let's talk about the US trade wars. You know, the one with China, the one where the US thought it could throw a bunch of tariffs at China and make them bend. Instead, China just flexed, and now the whole world is watching. And let us tell you, the US is not looking good. Here's the secret the US didn't expect. Every time it slapped tariffs on China, it opened up a world of opportunities for other nations. Suddenly, countries are realizing that they can break free from the US and create their trade networks. Enter the Belt and Road Initiative BRI, China's ambitious project to connect the world with infrastructure, investments, and trade routes that leave the US in the dust. While the US was busy picking fights, China was building its empire of global trade that was leaving American dominance in the rearview mirror. But it's not just China. Take Japan and South Korea, two countries that were supposed to be in the US's back pocket. But after the collapse of the Trans-Pacific Partnership TPP, these countries have started pivoting toward China. Japan and South Korea are now deeply involved in China's Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, which is quickly becoming the new standard for trade in Asia. And guess what? The US is not invited. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel for more videos about China's development, power, and influence on the world. Let's continue now. The irony here is delicious. The more the US tries to hold on to its control, the more it's pushing countries into China's arms. And now, China is sitting pretty as the new leader in global trade. America? Well, it's stuck in a trade war it doesn't know how to win. So, as the US faces off with China, the rest of the world is moving on, leaving Washington to watch as its power fades into the background. But don't worry, we've got more coming. The global South is rising, and it's about to make the US rethink its entire approach. The US is slowly losing its hold on the global South. And no, this isn't some slow, gradual process. It's happening fast, and it's a big problem for Washington. Why? Because these countries are done playing by America's rules. Look at BRICS. No longer just a joke or a side project, BRICS is now the real deal, with countries like Brazil, South Africa, and India calling the shots. They're no longer taking orders from the US or the IMF. Instead, these nations are teaming up to create a new financial order that's based on their needs, not Washington's. And guess who's not invited to that party? The US. But it's not just BRICS. The African Union AU is flexing its muscles, and countries all across Latin America and Asia are saying, thanks, but no thanks to US influence. They're rejecting US-backed institutions and looking for partners who actually have their interests at heart, not just a bunch of strings attached. As China invests more in Africa, it's becoming clear that these countries don't need the US to thrive anymore. China's Belt and Road Initiative has become the new standard for developing nations. Rather than begging the U.S. for foreign aid and development loans, countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are building real infrastructure with China, and it's paying off. These regions are slowly gaining the autonomy they've long been denied, and they're doing it without Washington's approval. Now, as the U.S. loses its grip, we're left with one big question. Can the U.S. survive in a world where it no longer has control over the global South? The answer is probably no. So, is the U.S. ready for a multipolar world? We're at a crossroads now. The U.S. has spent decades at the top of the global hierarchy, pulling the strings and telling everyone what to do. But now, with China, Russia, and other rising powers gaining strength, the question is, can the U.S. handle being knocked off its throne? The U.S. has always resisted a multipolar world. NATO, the UN, and every other institution were built around the idea that America should call the shots. But now, with China and other countries challenging its dominance, the U.S. is in full-on denial. It's clinging to the idea that it should still be the global leader, even as the world moves away from its control. The rise of China and India, the growth of BRICS, and the increasing power of multilateral organizations like the African Union and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO) all point to one thing. The U.S. is losing its grip. While it clings to its outdated strategies, the rest of the world is moving on without it. So here's the big question. Will the U.S. continue to resist this inevitable shift? Or will it accept the reality that the world is no longer its playground? Spoiler alert, it's not looking good for America. Let's be real. The U.S. is fighting a losing battle. As its imperialistic strategies of sanctions and trade wars backfire, a powerful anti-imperialist resistance is rising. Countries around the world, especially in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, are rejecting U.S. hegemony and embracing new models of growth and development. They're tired of being pushed around by Washington. Countries like China are showing the world that you don't need the U.S. to succeed. China's development model, which focuses on mutual benefit and regional cooperation, is a stark contrast to the U.S.'s model of exploitation and control. China's Belt and Road Initiative is proof that there's a better way, and the world is catching on. The rise of anti-imperialist movements across the global South is making it clear that the U.S. is no longer the leader of the pack. Its time is over, and a new world order is emerging, one that values cooperation over domination. The question is, will the U.S. adapt to this new reality, or will it continue to fight a losing battle? We would like to take a moment here and appreciate you all for commenting and sharing your opinions. Your insights always impress us. Do you think the U.S. has learnt its lesson?
BRICS bloc from flipping the global economy on? Can the U.S. stop the BRICS bloc from flipping the global economy on its head? Spoiler alert, the answer is no. The BRICS nations are no longer playing by the U.S.'s rules, and they're making moves that will change the global financial landscape forever. With the U.S. dollar in decline, BRICS is determined to carve out an alternative financial system that leaves the dollar behind. But what's even more shocking is that President Trump's threats to punish countries that abandon the dollar may accelerate this process, rather than slow it down. In this video, we'll dive into the growing push for de-dollarization, why Trump's threats will only fuel this shift, and how Russia's stance is helping to lead the charge. Let's get started. Trump has tried threatening BRICS and other nations willing to support it. These threats are bold, but ultimately misguided. He's warned that countries moving away from the US dollar will face heavy tariffs. But is this going to stop the de-dollarization movement? Or is it just another desperate attempt to hold on to an increasingly irrelevant financial system? The US dollar has been the global reserve currency for decades, an unshakable pillar of global trade, finance, and politics. The US has used its control over the dollar as a tool for global dominance, slapping sanctions on countries, controlling international trade, and flexing its economic muscle. But those days are numbered. Countries like China, Russia, and Brazil have been quietly exploring alternatives to the US dollar, and these alternatives are gaining momentum. Take China and Russia, for instance. Both nations have ramped up trade in their local currencies, yuan and rubles, to bypass the US dollar. Even India, which is a member of BRICS, has started pushing for more local currency transactions within the bloc. These moves are strategically designed to weaken the dollar's grip on global trade. But Trump's threats to impose tariffs on countries moving away from the dollar could play into BRICS' hands. Instead of intimidating countries into submission, they may fuel the fire of de-dollarization, causing more nations to jump ship and trade in alternative currencies. As the US uses sanctions as a weapon, more and more countries are looking for ways to escape its financial control. The question now is, will Trump's heavy-handed tactics be the final push that accelerates the dollar's decline? Russia is not sitting idly by as the US ramps up its economic threats. Russia is confident that these threats will backfire and only serve to push countries further away from the dollar. Dmitry Peskov, Russia's spokesperson, has made it clear. Trump's sanctions and tariffs are unlikely to have the desired effect. Instead, they will only encourage more countries to adopt their national currencies for trade. This is already happening. The weaponization of the dollar through sanctions has been one of the driving forces behind the push for alternative financial systems. Countries that have been targeted by US sanctions, like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia, are already seeking alternatives to the dollar. Russia, in particular, is taking this opportunity to strengthen its alliances with other BRICS members and promote the use of local currencies for trade. The rise of the ruble-yuan trade agreements between Russia and China is just one example of how BRICS nations are building their financial infrastructure. By trading in their local currencies, they bypass the need for the US dollar altogether. This trend is only expected to grow as BRICS moves forward with its plan to establish a new financial system. The US, with its heavy reliance on the dollar as a political tool, may find itself increasingly isolated as more countries adopt alternative trade arrangements. Russia's strategy is to foster a multipolar financial system, one that reduces dependence on the US and its dollar. So, while Trump's threats are meant to intimidate, they may be accelerating the shift away from the dollar faster than the US is prepared to handle. Now let's talk about the real game changer. BRICS' new payment system. This isn't just a theoretical idea. It's already in the works, and it has the potential to completely undermine the US dollar's dominance in global trade. The BRICS bloc is committed to creating a payment system that doesn't rely on US-controlled financial networks like SWIFT. Instead, this system will use a basket of local currencies, which will allow countries in the bloc to trade without using the dollar as an intermediary. This is a huge step toward financial independence for BRICS members, and a direct challenge to the US financial system. Russia's SPFS system for transfer of financial messages and China's CIPS cross-border interbank payment system are already laying the groundwork for this new financial infrastructure. These systems are designed to provide alternatives to SWIFT, which we and its allies have used to control global financial transactions. The goal is to make it easier for BRICS nations to conduct trade without relying on the US dollar, which has been the linchpin of global trade for decades. This payment system could help BRICS nations break free from the stranglehold of the US dollar and create a more decentralized financial system. But the implications of this system go beyond just BRICS nations. As more countries in the global south look for alternatives to the dollar, this payment system could serve as a model for a new global financial infrastructure. The US may try to counter these efforts with sanctions, but the reality is that the world is moving away from its financial dominance. BRICS is playing the long game, and it's creating a system that can withstand the pressures the US will undoubtedly try to exert. The future of global trade may no longer be dependent on the US dollar, and BRICS is leading the way. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. The reason why BRICS is gaining so much traction with developing countries is simple. The US dollar has become a tool of control. For decades, the US has used its economic power to impose sanctions on countries, dictate global trade terms, and manipulate the global economy to its advantage. But the cracks in this system are starting to show. Developing countries, particularly in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, are no longer willing to sit by and let the US control their economies through the dollar. Countries like Iran, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe have already experienced the devastating effects of US sanctions, which have crippled their economies and limited their ability to trade freely on the global stage. As a result, these countries, and many others, are seeking alternatives to the US dollar. BRICS is stepping in with an offer of a new financial system that empowers developing countries to trade on their terms. By moving away from the US dollar, these nations can protect their sovereignty and avoid being subject to the whims of US economic policies. But this shift isn't just about avoiding sanctions. It's about building a more equitable financial system that gives developing countries a fairer shot at global trade. The US has used the dollar to dominate international finance for too long, and now BRICS is offering a way out. As more countries in the global south join the movement toward de-dollarization, the US dollar's grip on the global economy continues to loosen. The question now is whether the US can stop this momentum, or if it's already too late. So, are the US dollar's days as the world's reserve currency numbered? Let's face it, the days of the US dollar as the undisputed global reserve currency are numbered. The rise of alternative payment systems like BRICS' new platform and the growing trend of local currency trade agreements are starting to erode the dollar's dominance. For decades, the US has enjoyed unparalleled control over global trade and finance. But that's changing. Countries like China and Russia have already begun pushing the yuan and ruble into international trade, signaling a shift away from the dollar. The US dollar's share in global foreign exchange reserves is shrinking, while the yuan's role in global trade is expanding. BRICS is pushing forward with its alternative payment system, and countries in the global south are increasingly looking to escape the dollar's dominance. The writing is on the wall. The US dollar is no longer the only game in town. As BRICS continues to grow and more countries move away from the dollar, the US will have to face the reality that its financial empire is fading. The question isn't if the US dollar will lose its status as the world's reserve currency. It's when. As more countries adopt alternative currencies for trade, the US may find itself on the sidelines, struggling to maintain its grip on global finance. BRICS is leading the charge, and the future of global finance is looking less and less dollar-dependent. What do you think? Can the US stop the BRICS bloc from reshaping the global financial system? Or is it too late to halt the tide of de-dollarization? Let us know in the comments section.
Kofi, follow me.